Meeting of the Port Phillip City Council. The City of Port Phillip respectfully acknowledges the Yalukit Willam clan of the Boomerang. We pay our respects to their elders, both past and present, and we acknowledge and uphold their traditional relationship to this land. Tonight's meeting is being held via the WebEx platform and is streamed via Council's webcast page and Facebook Live. This is the first online meeting of Council. And while we have planned for this event, there always remains the risk of technical issues arising that are beyond our control. If we experience a technical issue tonight, we will adjourn the meeting for a short time to resolve the issue. If the issue cannot be resolved and the meeting cannot continue, then we'll adjourn till tomorrow evening and details will be circulated to the public as early as possible. So, first up, we've got a two-step process, councillors, just to change the order of business. We have one item of urgent business, being a motion on council meeting processes, which affects public comments on the agenda items and councillor voting. I would like to move this item so that it's considered now. So can I please have a resolution to change the order of the business and accept an urgent item regarding meeting processes? Do I have a mover? Councillor Copsey to move. Please use the chat. Councillor Brand to second. I will now put that motion. All those in favour? I will now call out your name. Councillor Baxter?
For.
Councillor Bond?
For.
Councillor Brand?
For.
Councillor Brand?
For.
Councillor Copsey?
For.
Councillor Crawford?
For.
Councillor Gross?
For.
Councillor Pearl?
For.
Councillor Simic? And Councillor Voss. The motion is carried unanimously. So item 17 is urgent item of business, which is the meeting processes. So we've brought that forward. The COVID-19 Omnibus, the Emergency Measures Act 2020, was enacted on the 24th of April 2020. This Act amends the Local Government Act 2020 to enable council meetings to be conducted by electronic means. The COVID-19 Omnibus Act is silent on the processes council should use in conducting online meetings, and therefore minor deviations from council processes have been identified to assist the smooth and transparent running of this meeting. So accordingly, I seek a councillor to move a motion, and I will read that as a matter of transparency and good governance, council endorses the following change to the meeting process in the conducting of virtual council meetings. Changing the order of business so that all contributions from the public, in brackets, comment and questions, close brackets, are heard at the start of the meeting during the agenda item public questions and submissions. And, next bullet point, conducting a vote on all motions under division instead of by a silent show of hands, where the Mayor will call upon councillors individually in alphabetical order to state their vote. Do I have a mover? Councillor Baxter to move and Councillor Simic to second. Would anyone like to speak to the motion? Then I will put that motion. All those in favour? Councillor Baxter?
For.
Councillor Bond?
For.
Councillor Brand?
For.
Councillor Copsey?
For.
Councillor Crawford?
For.
Councillor Gross?
For.
Councillor Pearl?
For.
Councillor Simic?
Didn't hear.
Councillor Simic? Very faint, Councillor Simic. I could lip read there. For.
For.
Great, thank you. That motion is carried. Thank you. So we'll move to the first item on the agenda, which is apologies. And councillors, we don't have any apologies tonight as we're all in attendance. Item number 2, which is minutes of the previous meeting. Councillors, the minutes of the ordinary meeting held on the 15th of April 2020 have been circulated. Are there any questions relating to those minutes? There are none. So can I have a motion to confirm these minutes, please? Councillor Crawford to move and Councillor Gross to second. I'll then put that motion. All those in favour? Councillor Baxter?
For.
Councillor Bond?
For.
Councillor Brand?
For.
Councillor Copsey?
For.
Councillor Crawford?
For.
Councillor Gross?
For.
Councillor Pearl?
I'm for.
Councillor Simic?
For.
Councillor Voss, for. That motion is unanimously carried. Thank you. Item 3, which is declarations of conflicts of interest. Does any councillor have a conflict of interest in the matters being discussed tonight? I see there are none. Item 4, which is public question time and submissions. So now we'll hear all public questions and comments on report items from members of the public. All requests to speak were required to be submitted by 4 p.m. this afternoon. At the time of registering to speak, submitters were given the option to join the WebEx meeting virtually and ask their questions live during the meeting, or have an officer read their statement on their behalf. Statements submitted by members of the public will be read by the Coordinator of Governance. So I would like to now call upon Ms. Rhonda Small for the Community Alliance of Port Phillip, CAP. She's speaking to item 14.1, which is a notice of intention to sell 8 York Street, St Kilda West. And we're receiving that submission a bit later on, and she would like to present to Council.
Thank you, Mayor and Councillors. Can you hear me?
We can indeed.
So my name's Rhonda Small for the Community Alliance of Port Phillip. I live in St Kilda. As identified in the report to Council of the 4th of March 2020, the sale of 8 York Street is seen as an opportunity to replenish the Strategic Property Fund. Its sale could also be seen as a loss to children's services in the municipality. The decision to sell council assets is always a serious one, to be weighed up very carefully, especially in our densely populated inner urban area. Once lost means rarely regained. New public acquisitions are rare, competition is usually strong and prices are high. Having been built in the 1970s as a community kindergarten, the York Street building is now considered to be based on an obsolete operating model. It's too small to be functionally or economically viable for a contemporary children's centre. The relevant Children's Services team has advised that York Street is redundant to service needs. Not used at all since 2015, the building and site are judged to be a burden on council resources, costing some $10,000 to maintain annually. If sold, the proceeds will be allocated to the Strategic Property Fund. So CAP has a number of questions about the proposed sale. A small number of council properties currently being used for early childhood services do not meet current standards. For example, the centre at Eildon Road, as identified in the recent Children's Services Review. Will a proposal to sell York Street be considered in light of overall children's services and building needs in this part of St Kilda, West St Kilda, before the decision to sell is made? Would a 2-storey early childhood facility, for which there are now approved models, be a possibility at the York Street site? Have the relative benefits of selling the York Street site versus, for example, selling the Eildon Road site been considered, given a need for a more modern early childhood facility in this area of the municipality? If not needed for early childhood education, have alternative public or community uses of the site been thoroughly explored? And if sold, will the funds be earmarked in the Strategic Property Fund for use in developing or maintaining council's other early childhood properties? And finally, given the effect of the COVID-19 crisis on the state of the property market, is now a wise time to sell in any case? Thank you.
Can't hear you, Bernadine.
Can you hear me now?
Sure can.
Thank you very much, Ms Small. Councillors may take up those questions at the item 14.1 and ask them on your behalf to the officers. I'd like to call upon Clive Bowden, please. He's speaking to item 14.5, which is Marlborough Street, the Heads of Agreement, Housing First. He'd like to present to Council. Welcome, Mr Bowden.
Good evening, councillors. Can you hear me clearly?
Can hear you clearly.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, I would like to thank Council for your consideration this evening and your continued support and commitment to the Port Phillip Housing Trust and to the delivery of the In Our Backyard strategy. I'm here with you virtually tonight to represent Housing First as the trustee of the Port Phillip Housing Trust and to provide our absolute and continuing commitment to see the Marlborough Street project delivered. My time with Housing First as trustee of the trust has been relatively short at just over 2 years, and you would have seen me and heard from me at many occasions at these meetings. However, in that time, we, in partnership with the City of Port Phillip, have made significant progress toward the delivery of this project as envisioned in the In Our Backyard strategy document. This includes more recently obtaining a notice of decision to grant a planning permit in December with the council's support. And an extension is asked to be considered largely due to events outside of our control, external objections to a positive decision, and delays in state government funding that were originally planned to be announced in June of last year. With your continued support, we can enable this exemplar project to provide the kind of hope needed in light of this pandemic that has impacted us all. Marlborough Street is now a prime case for any economic stimulus for funding, which is exactly what Victorians and residents of the City of Port Phillip need. The creation of jobs and safe, affordable and high quality family homes to look forward to in an area we are lucky enough to work and reside in. I'd like to thank councillors for their consideration and time tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr Bowden. And once again, councillors may take up some of your questions and comments at item 14.5 for Marlborough Street. Now I'd like to call upon Mr Bruce Armstrong from the Ratepayers of Port Phillip Inc. He's speaking to item 14.8, which is the Council Plan and Budget 2020-21, direction setting, revised in consideration of the impact of COVID-19 pandemic. So he'd like to present to Council. Welcome, Mr Armstrong.
Thank you, Mayor. My question relates to 4.4.1, which talks about rate funding, not unreasonably subsidising services that provide private benefit. My question is, are councillors aware that contrary to 4.4.1, the City of Port Phillip is one of only a handful of councils, I think 4 out of 79, that treat the private good of waste services as a public good? Are councillors aware that this is expressly against the Local Government Better Practice Guide 2014 Revenue and Rating Strategy, which states it is more appropriate to recover the cost of services that have predominantly private good characteristics through user pays, charges, and use property rates to offset the cost of public goods? I have another question. Do you want me to do that? I have 2 more if you like.
Yes, please.
My next question relates to the borrowing from the future and deferring spending, and refers to 2.7.2, where council talks about maintaining a cash surplus, nominates cease paying down existing debt, draw down on non-statutory reserves, or you might also know it as general reserves, borrowing up to 75 million or a pause in reduce in Fisherman's Bend Growth Fund allowance. And it also talks about 2.9 where it mentions forecasted 2.6 billion spending over the next 10 years, 20% of it on community asset maintenance, 19% on service contracts, which leaves 51% left for discretionary spending. At a previous council budget meeting last year, we were requesting you conduct zero-based budgeting exercise. We note that come in. And we Instead of borrowing from the future and deferring spending, in order to balance the budgets, will councillors instead consider the much harder task of prioritising existing and upcoming spending programs and projects to those that the community would consider essential and those that provide the most benefit or the biggest bang for your buck? And will results of the zero-based budget exercise be made public? Perhaps Council's apparent strategy of simply borrowing from the future is why it has recommended for years that those ratepayers who cannot afford their rates and should simply defer them to a later date effectively reverse mortgaging their property. And my third question is about the waste levy. 3.6 Council says will require the consideration of a waste and amenity levy by a future council and or significant reductions in other services to maintain financial sustainability. 2.6.7 says that the waste services expenditure increase will contribute over 64 million to the rates cap challenge over the 10-year outlook, that old 10-year outlook. May we assume that if Council chooses to introduce a new levy to fund the $64 million rates cap blowout, that this levy will be in addition to existing rates base? Or is the opposite true, that for every dollar of waste levy collected in total, Council would reduce rates collected in total by $1? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Armstrong. And again, I'm sure many of the councillors will take up some of your questions at 14.8 in the agenda tonight. Now, we have received a further 9 submissions that will be read out on behalf of members of the public, councillors, and I'm going to call the name of each member of the public and refer to the Coordinator of Governance to read a summary of the submission. So the first one is in relation to 7.1, which is a joint letter, visitor parking at the Grace Community Living Facilities, and it's Maggie Zapadlo. Kirsty, are you reading?
You, Madam Mayor. Yes, I read the resident submissions as follows.
Yes.
From Maggie Zapadlo, I have lived in the area for 50 years and don't drive. My partner and I are and have always been a one-car family and appreciate Port Phillip Council's policy in this regard. By granting the visitors permits, it would not stop the visitors, just have them parking and paying. I have organised this petition as I feel that the elderly demographic at the Grace needs special consideration. I'm doing this because I care. Although there are approximately 50 restricted spaces in the area between Stead Street and Kingsway, the nearest unpaid parking is roughly 10 minutes walk. Elderly friends visiting residents, some using walkers, pay for 1 hour, then if requiring a longer stay, need to move their car and pay for further time. Another concern is when the aged care facility at 114 Albert Road is up and running, those elderly in aged care have a higher need for visitors. $4 an hour is a lot for pensioners. Since this petition, 2 more of the residents have written expressing their need for this concession from the council.
Thank you very much for that submission, Ms. Zapadlo. Now we've got another one for the same item. John, he's a resident of the Grace Community Living.
Through you, Madam Mayor. As residents of the Grace, being in our early 80s, we request visitor parking permits to be provided to curbside parking on the slip road to Albert Road, outside the Grace at 128 Albert Road, South Melbourne. It is very difficult for friends and relatives to visit as there are no visitor spaces available at the Grace and only 1 hour metre parking on the slip road midweek. When the full aged care facility is completed next door, the problem will be doubled. Currently, the slip road is much underutilised and a number of permit spaces would not disadvantage other users. Your favourable consideration of this request would greatly enhance our wellbeing and would be much appreciated.
Thank you to John for that. Now, Anne and Alex McDonnell, who are also residents of the Grace Community Living.
Through you, Madam Mayor, as newly arrived residents, we all love where we live. Its access to amenities is unrivalled as far as retirement villages go. To support this and perhaps pave the way for future developments in the area, we ask that the Council provide permit parking for visitors, both social and professional.
Thank you, Anne and Alex. Now the next item, 7.2, which is the response to residents of Glover and Bridge Street, request for an extension of the island on Pickles Street. Mr. Peter Tolhurst.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I read a summary as follows. We do not support the suggested outcome of closing the centre median to prevent crossing or turning across the Pickles Bridge Glover Street intersection. My objection is based on the belief that the closure of the intersection will create another rat run into Creekshake Street as vehicles travelling south in Bridge Street and wishing to either cross or turn right into Pickles will take the last alternative turn right into Creekshake to reach Audit Street where they can turn at traffic lights. I recognise that the purpose of the petition is to improve safety and I support reasonable efforts to find a remedy, although reported accidents are not frequent. An alternative option is to address the actual problem with the intersection, poor line of sight for vehicles entering the crossing. The roads join at an angle that is not 90 degrees and this creates poor visibility of traffic travelling along Pickles Street. The solution I propose is to create clearer vision for the cars crossing, and this can be achieved by increasing the distance of no parking spaces in Pickles Street. This solution will come at minimal cost. I do acknowledge it could impact homes which front onto Pickles Street. However, most, if not all, of those homes have rear vehicle access via lanes.
You're on mute, Bernadine.
Thank you, Councillor Pearl. Thank you, Peter and Deb, for that submission. Now we have 8.1, presentation of CEO report. Mr. James Woolett on behalf of the Middle Park Library Action Group, Inc.
Through you, Madam Mayor, the Middle Park Library Action Group recognises the difficult decisions that Council will have to take over the coming months as a result of the impact of COVID-19 on Council's finances. We believe that the service measures stated on the CEO report, page 18, areas for focus, warrant greater scrutiny and analysis before any final decisions are taken. In the Council Plan and Budget report, it states $200,000 reduction in library purchases. We are surprised and disappointed that a decision has been taken to cut the new materials budget by 25%. Based on PLVN statistics 2018 to 19 new materials budget of 807,967. We urge Council to reconsider this proposal and to postpone any action on its decision to cut library services and resources. There is pent-up demand across Melbourne for libraries to reopen as a large number of letters in today's age and the street library outside Middle Park Library demonstrate. As soon as libraries are allowed to reopen, the Action Group looks forward to working with Port Phillip librarians to encourage local residents and their children to make the most of their library.
Thank you very much, Mr. Woolett. And now 14.1, which is notice of intention to sell 8 York Streets in Kilda West, the receiving of submission, Mr. Adrian Jackson.
Through you, Madam Mayor, as a ratepayer for 38 years, I support the sale of this former kindergarten site. The property sale prices will not be affected by the virus as this site is in a sought-after location in a trendy part of the municipality.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson. Another one from Mr. Jackson, but this is to 14.8, which is the Council Plan and Budget 2020-21 direction setting.
Through you, Madam Mayor, submission point 1, to rein in spending in these difficult financial times, the Linton Gallery should be sold as a going concern to the art establishment, and Gasworks Art Park should become self-sufficient by charging higher fees and increased ticket prices. Submission point 2, to help with the current financial problems, Council should sell most of the art collection. Most of it is in storage and the Council is not an art gallery.
Thank you. And we have one from Campbell Spence, which is again on this particular item on the agenda, which is 14.8 ratepayers of Port Phillip Inc.
Through you, Madam Mayor, City of Port Phillip proposes to use 11 million of the General Reserve to fund a defined benefit superannuation fund shortfall call. Question 1, how does $11 million of defined benefit super fund top-up meet the General Reserve definitions included in the annual report? Furthermore, according to COP's website, Council will draw upon general reserves to fund the voluntary refund scheme in relation to the mismanaged car parking fine appeals process up to $8.8 million. Question 2, how does funding parking fines appeal refunds meet the general reserve definitions? According to the same website, these general reserves will be replenished over coming years. Question 3, how does the City of Port Phillip plan to replenish these general reserves if it has a huge budget hole and millions are being used to pay for fine refunds and a top-up of the defined benefit super fund? Question 4, is using up the general reserve in this way simply preventing the City of Port Phillip's future ability to use the general reserves for the community's benefit, that is, to fund infrastructure and productive asset spending?
And on the same topic, we have Christina Sirikoff from the ratepayers of Port Phillip as well.
Through you, Madam Mayor. The Fisherman's Bend funding gap is described in the financial risk section of the 10-year financial outlook from 4 December 2019 as an almost certain event with extreme consequences and a catastrophic risk rating. Council has now disclosed that they will apply to the Essential Services Commission to raise rates by more than the rates cap to fund the Fisherman's Bend funding gap. Question 1. Can Council please explain the controls that will reduce the catastrophic risk rating down to medium as it calculates? Do councillors agree that it is appropriate that this catastrophic financial risk is not included in the 10-year outlook? Does Council realistically expect new residents to the area, such as those at the nearing completion huge building at 320 Plummer Street, to simply wait to have the facilities that other residents have? What will Council do when new residents inevitably apply pressure to build additional new infrastructure, such as the millions spent on Curate Park and the nearby community facilities? Question 2. Do councillors agree that the proposal to reduce council FTE from 883 to 868 by the end of the 2021 financial year is a sufficient reduction to meet the current economic climate and outlook for the future, particularly when Port Phillip employs more council staff per 100,000 of population than nearby councils? Question 3, clause 2.7.1, Council says that it will use the upcoming 2% rates rise to fund increasing waste costs and increase support for the community. Is it true that the upcoming staff EBA pay rise on 1 July 2020 will consume almost half of the 2% rates rise? Question 4, do councillors agree that Council should be using historical data to create the 10-year forecast rather than using updated data that accounts for the current unprecedented in our lifetime economic climate? Perhaps the pessimistic scenario, which results in another 33 million of budget problems over the 10-year outlook, is more appropriate.
Thank you, and thank you to Ms Sirikoff for those questions. Again, councillors may take up those questions at that budget item time. So that's it for public question time and submissions. Now we'll move to item 5 on the agenda, which is councillor question time. Councillors, as I've just mentioned, if your questions relate to any item, report item, please hold that question until later on. Does any councillor have a question? I have a question, if nobody else does. It's in relation to the federal funding of childcare centres. It's directed to Mr. Keenan. I'd just like to understand with the reneging of the payment to councils for childcare funding, are you able to clearly articulate what that means to council finances?
Thank you. Through you, Mayor.
what we know it means currently it's about $1.3 million reduction in income for the remainder of this financial year, that is till 30 June. We're still unclear as to what arrangements will be in place post 30 June for funding of childcare centres. We're assuming at the moment that the funding will revert to the previous arrangements, although there's been no announcement along those lines. So it's in the order of 1.3 million. We've been working through MAV. It is becoming clearer now that it's that the view of the Commonwealth is that we won't receive funding.
Mr. Keenan, has there been any reasons for why private and community are receiving the funding but not council?
The statements made by the Commonwealth on record, not in relation to childcare per se, but in relation to local government in general, that it is a state government responsibility.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? I'm not seeing any in the councillors wanting to ask a question. Okay, so we will move on to the sealing schedule, item 6, and we don't have any items to require sealing. Item 7, which is petitions and joint letters. Councillors, we have one joint letter on tonight's agenda and a response to a previous petition. So 7.1, joint letter from the owner residents of the Grace Community Living Facility for retirees requesting to have visitor parking installed outside the front of their facility at 114 to 128 Albert Road, South Melbourne. Councillors, do you have any questions for the officers of this report? Councillor Crawford.
I was trying to type Q. I guess my question is, reading the report, it seems that there are 141 spaces on site and it is a recent build. Do we know how many of those spaces are visitor allocated to visitors? Because that would have been part of the requirement, I imagine, even though it was under previous council.
Ms. Rossick.
Through you, Madam Mayor. You're right, there's 141 spaces. 89 of those were to be used for residential parking and could also be used for visitor parking. And the visitor parking that was to be provided, according to the permit, needed to be free. And the traffic report and the permit conditions clearly indicated that the parking supply needs to meet the retirement apartments requirements. So it was up to the developer to allocate the parking, available parking to the residents and to allow some for visitors, depending on need.
So it would probably, could I ask a follow-up question, Mayor?
Certainly.
So it would actually probably be it's about the aged care home or working out spaces, and it's a council responsibility, and that was clear from the outset.
Yes, we were very clear during the planning permit process about the responsibilities and that residents would not be entitled to parking permits in accordance with council's parking management policy.
Thank you.
Ms. Rossick, based upon some of the submissions that we've heard, it's quite a long walk for some elderly people to go and visit residents in the facility. Would there be anything we can do to move some of those visitor parking places a little closer for them?
Through you, Madam Mayor, we don't have visitor parking permit on street. That's not something we can provide. There is free parking about 250 metres away on Kingsway and Palmerston Crescent, and also 1 hour and 2 hour unpaid parking on Cubden Street, Stead Street and Eastern Road, which is about 500 metres away. So it could be a 5 to 10 minute walk, but we don't have provisions for visitor parking normally on street.
Okay, any other questions, councillors? Okay, we have an officer's recommendation on this. Do I have a mover for that or something different? Councillor Crawford to move, Councillor Copsey to second. Councillor Crawford, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, I would briefly. Look, I understand the difficulty in perhaps some of the parking for older residents or visitors. However, we have had a long-standing policy, and I know that it's something that we have to abide. It's the builders, the facility itself has 141 spaces, and I'm sure that there could be access provided more visitor spaces with some negotiation. We can't do this because if we start doing it for one group, then it becomes something that we would have to do for everyone. I feel sure that with 141 spaces already in the building, that there is a way of offering free parking and closer parking for those visitors. So I am happy to support the officer's recommendation to not allow visitors parking on the street.
Thank you, Councillor Crawford. Councillor Copsey, would you like to speak to the motion? Would any other councillor like to speak to the motion?
I would if I could.
Councillor Pearl.
Thanks, Councillor Voss.
Yes, you.
Just firstly want to welcome the residents and the Grace to the City of Port Phillip. It's been a long journey constructing that site, and we're certainly happy. We were happy to see not a construction site there until the building next door started being renovated. So I've met with a number of residents over this issue, and it also goes to the heart of council's decision making around planning and the role and influence we play on visitor parking. And it's very important going forward that buildings such as this in this area, this tightly held area, have visitor parking to avoid this exact issue. The spaces on the street, yes, along the median strip on Eastern Road there and Albert Road are underutilised at the moment, but that won't stay that way for very long, in my opinion. So it really comes down to a problem where council has the solution at the inception of the design of these buildings. So happy to support the officer's recommendation, and looking forward to meeting more of the residents of the Grace Community Living Facility. Thank you, Councillor Voss.
Anyone else like to speak to the motion?
Yes, I'd like to speak if it's possible.
Councillor Brand.
Councillor Brand.
If you could please put that in the chat, that would be great, Councillor.
Yes.
As per the meeting procedures. Thank you,
I'm a little bit slow on that, yes. I will put in an S.
It's okay.
And send it to you. Okay. Yes, look, having had the experience of both of my parents in an aged care centre, it's essential to be visiting them as often as possible, and of course, parked under the facility sometimes, and parked in the street plenty of times. I know about all the convenience and all of the difficulties and what have you. So I feel for you a lot, but in this case, provision has been made for parking for visitors under the facility in the car parking provided by the development, and it is actually the responsibility of the management there to allocate enough car parking spaces in their own on site. Let's say, I don't know where they are exactly, under the building or next to it, but it is the responsibility of the management to allocate enough car parking for its residents, and that's the basis that the building was developed on, and that's the basis that we have to go forward, because every parking space on the street is going to become more and more contested, not less and less. So I know your need, but the car parks are there for you, and it's up to the management to actually reallocate things so that there's enough. I'm glad to hear that you're enjoying being there. It sounds good. So best of luck from us.
Thank you, Councillor Brand. Any other speakers? Councillor Crawford, would you like to close? Then I'll put that motion. All those in favour? Councillor Baxter?
4.
Councillor Bond?
4.
Councillor Brand?
4.
Councillor Copsey?
4.
Councillor Crawford?
4.
Councillor Gross?
4.
Councillor Pearl?
For that.
Councillor Simic?
4.
And Councillor Voss 4. That motion is unanimously carried. Thank you. Now, the next item, which is 7.2, which is a response to the request from residents of Bridge and Glover Street for the extension of the island in the middle of Pickles Street so that cars cannot cross over Pickles Street. Councillors, are there any questions of the officers in relation to this report? Oggy, you have a question?
Just a question, if you can hear me okay, just regarding the next steps as outlined in the report. When do officers anticipate these next steps will take place?
Ms. Ross,
particularly referring to the further detailed analysis that's required around this issue.
Thank you, Councillor Simic. Ms. Rosick?
Through you, Madam Mayor, some of the work, such as the surveys that will be required to be undertaken, cannot be undertaken until the traffic picks up, basically, post-COVID emergency, when people start going back to school and to work. So it's difficult to anticipate when we can start at this time. There are no further government announcements, but we're envisaging that we should be able to do this work in a few months' time. But it is, as I said, dependent upon the state of emergency and COVID conditions. But we will commence work as soon as we can.
Thank you, Ms. Rosick. Any further questions, councillors? Then I'll put that motion. Oh, sorry. So we have an officer's recommendation. Do I have a mover for that or something different? Councillor Simic to move. Councillor Baxter to second. Thank you. Then would anyone like to speak to the motion? Councillor Simic.
Well, briefly, Mayor, just to thank the residents for their patience while investigations are carried out. This issue came to us some time ago, and officers have been I've been looking forward to the response and looking forward to the results of the further investigation so that we can work with you to resolve this issue as best as possible. So thank you for your patience and for raising this issue to our attention.
Thank you. Councillor Baxter, would you like to speak to the motion? Would anyone else like to speak to the motion? If not, I'll put that motion. All those in favour? Councillor Baxter?
For.
Councillor Bond?
For.
Councillor Brand?
Sorry, I was just trying to enter that I wanted to speak, but for.
Councillor Copsey?
For.
Councillor Crawford?
For.
Councillor Gross?
For.
Councillor Pearl?
For.
Councillor Simic? And Councillor Voss for. That motion is unanimous. Thank you. Move to item 8, which is the presentation of the CEO report now. Councillors, are there any questions of the officers in relation to this report? I'll kick off with a question first up. It's probably a question to you, Mr. Smith. I noticed in the report that the emergency COVID response amount of money that was approved was $2.5 million. However, in the report, it talks about that it has been increased to $2.95 million. I'm just wondering if you could please explain why and what that was used for.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I believe Mr. Carroll's going to explain that discrepancy for us. Mr. Carroll.
Thank you, Mr. Carroll.
Sorry, Madam Mayor. Madam Mayor, if Mr. Carroll can't answer, I'll take that one on notice.
Sorry.
Oh, he is there. Thank you.
There he is.
Sorry, little technical issue on my point here. Through you, Madam Mayor.
Yes.
Essentially, the initial forecast of the cost of the emergency relief package, we used some assumptions around what the level of support might be required for South Melbourne Market. and essentially that the level of impact of the restrictions on trade and revenue for the market storeholders has been greater than we anticipated, and therefore there's been greater eligibility for council support. And so that has led to us revising the forecast of what we think the impact and the cost will be over the next up to 30th of June.
Okay, so thank you very much. So it's solely related to the South Melbourne market.
Through you, Madam Mayor, it's largely related to the South Melbourne market, and there's a few other items. Similarly, we did some initial forecasts, and these are, just updated assumptions. But that component is largely related to the South Melbourne market, but there are some other items as well.
Okay, Councillor Gross, you have a question.
Thanks very much, Madam Mayor. Look, great, interesting report in a complicated time for the council, and thanks very much for the report, Mr. CEO. I've just got three about stuff happening and not happening in Elwood. The Elwood outdoor fitness station project is off track in the report. And my question is, this is an installation of marine-grade fitness equipment. I understand it's behind mostly because of additional design work associated with the replacement of a stormwater drain at the site. What's the timelines now expected for this project? Secondly, the sports field lighting expansion of the Elwood Parks Village project is similarly off track. This is about the installation of 16 sports field lights at Elwood Park's 4 playing fields. And I understand that tender submissions are being reviewed. COVID-19 associated supply chain delays have been a bit of a problem. So once again, the question is, how long is the delay? I'm not cross about the delay. It's really explicable in the current COVID-19 context, but I just want to know about the date. And finally, and I think this is quite exciting for Elwood, is the Elwood Foreshore Facility Strategy project is off track. So it's off track due, I understand, to schedule and budget issues. And in the report, it says that there will be a 4-month delay to the project as consultant availability is becoming reduced and stakeholder interactions are difficult with the needs to be safe and healthy. So I suppose my question, I'm happy to take this on notice, is really important project. How do we make this happen in terms of budget, safety and planning? That's all for me, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Gross. Just wondering who would take those questions. Mr. Johnson, maybe, or Smith, can you help me?
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Yep.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Through you, I will ask Mr. Anthony Trail, Council's Manager of Open Space and Recreation, to address the first two of Councillor Gross's queries on the fitness station project and the sports field lighting expansion. And the third question on that Elwood Foreshore Facility Strategy project will be answered by Mr. Carroll.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Trail.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Mayor. In regards to the storm water and the Elwood Fitness Station, the storm water element has been resolved. That means we're now out to get in prices. The timeline for delivery for that project is a June construction commencement, and that will be an approximately 8-week construction. So we're looking for that to be completed August and September for our spring season. To answer an update regarding the Elwood lighting project, that has been out for tender. There has been supply demand change and issues there. The pricing is not considered value for money, therefore that project will be going back out for a new public tender. So we're looking at a 4-month delay on that process, but it is going back out to market to get prices and try and deliver construction as soon as possible.
Thank you, Mr. Trail. And
through you, Madam Mayor?
Yes, Mr. Carroll.
In terms of the third question from Councillor Gross regarding the Elwood foreshore planning, it is a very exciting opportunity and project for council in an area that is begging for additional investment. There is some much needed renewal investment in some of the buildings, but the opportunity is much grander than that in terms of how that might be integrated with transport or the traffic flows, the parking, the playground, the foreshore together as an integrated refurbishment and redevelopment. The first stage to progressing that is really to complete the planning work that's currently planned, noting that there is a slight delay because of the impacts of COVID-19. And that will provide some options, some strategic options, including some high-level cost and funding options for council to consider. There is some capacity in the asset renewal reserve and also in the project portfolio from about year 3 to year 10 in the 10-year financial plan, which could be prioritised towards such an investment if the council had a mind to at that point in time. And we would also, depending on the size of investment and the potential benefits, look to partner with other organisations such as the state, for instance, to help fund any major investment down there.
Madam Mayor, we can't hear you.
Councillor Simic.
Thank you, Mayor. My question is actually in part already been answered, so I'll withdraw. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions? I will take up the question from Mr. Woollett earlier. He's put it in the presentation of the CEO report, but perhaps it needs to go in the budget. But it really questions the need to cut library services and resources at this particular time. Is there any opportunity to reconsider that decision?
Through you, Mayor.
Mr. Keenan, yes.
Yeah, that's a proposal for next year's budget. So the opportunity to reconsider that will be when council is considering the budget.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions? Okay, then we've got an officer's recommendation to accept the CEO report. Do I have a mover? Councillor Simic to move. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Crawford to second, thank you. Councillor Simic, would you like to speak?
Thank you, Mayor. It is hard to believe that so much is reported on has happened in light of the dramatic circumstances that COVID-19 placed on council and all of our staff. So I'd really like to use this opportunity to congratulate all of our staff and the CEO and everybody working together to achieve as many things that have been achieved. There are a few projects that are off track and currently difficult for us to get to them. And in light of everything that's happening, council is looking at our budget, and we'll talk about budget planning later on today. And the future is not as locked in as it has felt previously. But the thing that really stands out to me is how much work our CEO and
Okay, Councillor Simic, you've frozen in time. Okay. Councillor Crawford, would you like to speak? No? I think we got the gist of what Councillor Simic was saying. It was all thank you and praise. Unfortunately, that's part of the IT issues that we're going to experience halfway through a little speech. So would anyone else like to speak to the CEO report motion? No, well then I'll put that motion under division. Councillor Baxter?
4.
Councillor Bond?
4.
Councillor Brand?
4.
Councillor Copsey?
4.
Councillor Crawford?
4.
Councillor Gross?
4.
Councillor Pearl?
4, please.
Councillor Simic? And Councillor Voss is a 4. That motion is carried. That's unfortunate because he did move the item, so I'm sure it's a 4, but we'll have to work out how we document that. Right, now, thank you. We'll move on to the presentations of reports. First up is 11.1. And I can hear some really heavy breathing. Can everyone please mute their microphone, please? Thank you. 11.1, which is a council maintenance and cleaning contracts update. Councillors, are there any questions of the officers on this report? If there are none, we have an officer's recommendation. Do I have a mover for that or something different? Councillor, so Councillor Copsey to move and Councillor Baxter to second. Councillor Copsey, would you like to speak to the motion? Councillor Baxter, would you like to speak to the motion? Would anyone like to speak to the motion? Then I'll put that motion. All those in favour? Councillor Baxter?
4.
Councillor Bond?
4.
Councillor Brand?
4.
Councillor Copsey?
4.
Councillor Crawford?
4.
Councillor Gross?
4.
Councillor Pearl?
4.
Councillor Simic? And Councillor Voss, 4. That motion is carried. Item 13.1, which is an update on DELWP's Council and Emergencies Capability and Capacity Evaluation Report. Councillors, any questions of the officers? This is an excellent report on the state of play at the moment. I'm wondering, Mr. Johnson, would you just give us a little update on how this has come about?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I might ask Council's Coordinator of Emergency Management and Plunkett to give you a brief summary of the background to the report. As councillors will see from the content of the report, DELWP's assessment was done late last year. It takes longer to get it before you than we would have liked. This is the first stage. There's coming up other stage that let Mr. Plunkett elaborate on.
Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. The Councils and Emergencies Capability and Capacity Evaluation Project is a 3-phase project. It's been in the process for approximately 2 years now, and its aim is to understand and enhance the capability and capacity of councils to meet their emergency management obligations under the Act 2013. It aims to provide a comprehensive overview of what the emergency management capability and capacity of local governments is. The second stage of the project looked at council for determining a target maturity and then a base maturity, which is what has been achieved here. And then the third phase of the project, which is due to be commenced later this year, will then look to work with councils to.
Okay, Mr. Plunkett, we seem to be losing you there. So I think we understand where we were getting to. So we might have to leave it there. Any other questions, councillors? Then we have an officer's recommendation. Do I have a mover for that or something different? I'm happy to move. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Gross will second. I'll quickly speak. I just wanted to say congratulations to the team that have responded and answered the questions to this particular emergency capability report. I think we see very clearly the maturity in the organisation. It also outlines quite clearly areas of weakness that we can further work on. And I think it's a prime time to have this information so that we you know, can do that as an organisation. But mainly I just wanted to say thanks for bringing it to us. Thanks for allowing the community to see where we are at and our level of maturity now, which is so much better than it was like 3 or 4 years ago. You know, so well done and congratulations. Councillor Gross, would you like to speak to the report? So no. Would anyone else like to speak? Then I'll put that motion. All those in favour? Councillor Baxter?
Madam Mayor?
Yes.
Apologies, I did put in the chat. I would like to speak to it briefly.
Oh, apologies. Councillor Copsey, please speak.
Thank you. I just wanted to also comment, I thought it was really excellent in this report to see that Port Phillip aimed very high in terms of the standard that we sought to achieve in terms of compliance and improvement of current capacity. I think we've seen throughout the start of 2020 the absolutely vital role that we all have to play as cities and shires in responding to emergencies. And you know, it's been a really tough start to the year. One of the, I think, silver linings or saving graces, or however you want to put it, in terms of the difficulties that we've all faced with not only the horror bushfire season, but now the issues that have emerged around the pandemic, is that we've seen that communities actually are core to recovery. And so I think that this this undertaking by DELWP and our participation in it is really timely. And I just want to thank the officers and those involved with the overall project for a really interesting and exhaustive report, and wish us all the best on the improvements that we can make as a result of this, and also congratulate the staff because, as Mayor Voss commented, it was clear that there is a really good capability existing within the organisation. Let's keep that up.
Thank you, Councillor Copsey. Would anyone else like to speak? Okay, then I'll put that motion. All those in favour? Councillor Baxter?
For.
Councillor Bond?
For.
Councillor Brand?
For.
Councillor Copsey?
For.
Councillor Crawford?
For.
Councillor Gross?
For.
Councillor Pearl?
For.
Councillor Simic?
For.
Thank you. And I'm also a for, so that motion is unanimously carried. Thank you. 14.1, which is the notice of intention to sell 8 York Street, St Kilda West. This is about receiving submissions. Councillors, do you have any questions of the officers for this report? Question from Councillor Simic.
Yes, Mayor, I'd like to take on Ms. Small's question from earlier on in the evening regarding this item.
So the last question was, just to repeat it for Mr. Savinkov. Given the effect of COVID-19 crisis on the state of the property market, is now a wise time to sell in any case? Mr. Savinkov.
Through you, Madam Mayor. I hope you
Yes.
can hear me.
I can hear you.
Right. Madam Mayor, look, it's reasonable to assume that housing prices may soften if they haven't already. We're already seeing that transaction volumes have fallen in the housing market, in the local housing market. That said, the property is a high quality property and market prices are still near record highs.
Okay. So there were a number of other bullet points, Mr. Savinkov. Do you have those in front of you at all? If not, I can read them out.
I do have my shorthand notes. I'm happy to address them all.
Thank you. I think that was the intention of Councillor Simic.
Okay, understood. Thank you. How does this 8 York Street fit in with the Children's Services Review? This one's being considered separately. It's a former children's centre that's been vacant for several years, unlike the others which are still active centres. The existing use rights of the children's centre has expired for this site, and it's considered a surplus property. The second question, is a 2-storey development possible? Yes, it's reasonable to assume that the site could accommodate a 2-storey development, but if we were on the market at the moment seeking to acquire a site for a 2-storey children's service, we'd be looking for a site approximately double the size of this one. Selling Eildon Road instead of this site, Madam Mayor, even if Council had determined to sell the Eildon Road site, which it hasn't, or indeed determined to sell any other site, officers would still be putting 8 York Street as a proposal to sell. Have alternative uses being explored? Yes, they have. Unfortunately, there's several things working against this site, including its size, its location, its zoning, its only moderate access to public transport. We haven't found any compelling alternative council use for this site, and our expert advice is that the highest and best market use is as a residential dwelling. There was another question about the proceeds of this sale. If it was sold, if the property went to sale and was sold, would the proceeds be earmarked for children's services?
Childhood properties, children's services.
Or childhood properties, yes. Look, the intention is that it goes to the reserve that's set aside for development of council's property portfolio, acquiring new sites and developing the existing sites. So if it was a strategic priority of council at the time to invest in that, that's where the money could go, yes.
Thank you.
Through you, Madam Mayor, just to clarify.
Yes, Mr. Carroll.
In the first instance, no, it won't be siphoned or be allocated specifically towards funding a particular purpose, apart from the broad range of strategic property development and acquisition objectives that council may have. When council determines to use that fund, it can make a decision about the specific purpose at that time, and that would be through a normal budget process.
Thank you for clarifying, Mr. Carroll. Councillor Crawford, you have a question.
It follows on from what Mr. Carroll was just saying. If we were to bring a motion, it is under the remit of council to. We could specify where we want to put it prior to anything being developed, if we were inclined to do so. Bring a motion to council.
It's probably a question for Mr. Carroll.
Through you, Madam Mayor, the council could make a determination that it wanted to put that money aside for a specific purpose. It's not recommended by officers in terms of providing you with the greatest flexibility to utilise that fund for your strategic priorities at the time. We are looking through the Children's Services Review and the infrastructure plan at the moment, as you're aware, looking at what to do in terms of some of our aged facilities. There certainly will be a need for investment in those, but we have a range of funding sources for that, and we may well recommend drawing down on this fund once we've done that work as well, and not just for the size of this investment, but maybe more broadly. But what we're suggesting is that you should maintain flexibility at this stage and look at the appropriate funding sources as opportunities come to life.
Thank you. Now we've got a question from Councillor Brand.
All of my questions have been answered, actually.
Excellent. Any other questions, councillors? Then we have an officer's recommendation. Councillors, do I have a mover for that or something different? We have Councillor Copsey to move and Councillor Crawford to second. Councillor Copsey, would you like to speak to the motion?
Good. I'm glad those.
Just briefly.
Sorry, Councillor Gross, I might mute you. I can hear your conversation. Councillor Copsey.
Just to state out loud that we thank the submitter for putting the submission in and for their detailed response to the issue, which will be now considered.
Thank you. Councillor Crawford? No? Councillor Pearl?
Thanks very much. We considered this initially in March and I voted against that submission back in the South Melbourne Town Hall for 3 reasons. I'll just quickly reiterate them there. The specific use of the reserve in the property reserve of these funds hasn't been allocated at all, so they will sit there. And in the short, medium and long term, there is no allocation or need or use of these funds. The market is not the best time to sell, obviously, which is a new reason. And I think we should keep it where it is at the moment. Strategically, it's an investment for the city from a financial point of view and a social point of view. So on those basis alone, I'll encourage councillors to vote against the motion this evening.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak to the motion?
Yes.
Councillor Brand.
Yes, look, all very good questions. A checklist of all of the things that, all of the filters that a decision like this would need to be passed through. I'm very confident that it does pass through all of those filters. All of the defects of this site that make it a defective children's services place actually also contributed to being a high value residential site, which is a really good thing because I think we can get more leverage out of this to go into useful stuff which is useful to the community. And I'm sure, well, it's up to each council to make sure that it gets directed to good community use. That's what council is there for. But yes, a good I mean, it's not an outcome yet, but I think it's a good set of questions, good set of answers, and I think ripe for converting into financial value, which will then be reconverted into community value.
Thank you. Councillor Copsey, you have a clarifying question.
Yes, and just perhaps officers can put the second part of the motion on the screen as well whilst we're in debate. I just wanted to seek clarification from officers that tonight we're just receiving the submissions that have been put in by community members in response to the notice of intention. We're not making a formal decision this evening on disposal of the property. Is that correct?
Thank you. Mr. Serenkov?
Through you, my Mayor, that's correct. Tonight's largely about listening and starting to consider, and the subsequent meeting will be about further considering and making a decision.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak for or against the motion? I will briefly as well, and just wanted to thank everyone for considering this and making their submissions to this item. And you know, it is a step along the way in the process, and we aren't there yet in terms of our decision, but it is good to be able to hear from the community about what their thoughts are in relation to 8 York Streets in Kilda. So thank you very much for everyone taking the time to do that. Councillor Copsey, would you like to close? Then I'll put that motion. All those in favour? Councillor Baxter?
4.
Councillor Bond?
4.
Councillor Brand?
4.
Councillor Copsey?
4.
Councillor Crawford?
4.
Councillor Gross?
4.
Councillor Pearl?
Against?
Councillor Simic?
4.
Councillor Voss? 4. That motion is carried. Thank you. Now we'll move on to the next item on the report, which is 14.2. That is the outcomes of the Audit and Risk Committee meeting held on the 25th of February 2020. Councillors, do you have any questions of the officers? I note there are none. Then we have an officer's recommendation. Councillor Copsey to move. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Pearl to second. Councillor Copsey, would you like to speak to the motion?
I just reserve my right, thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Pearl.
Thanks to Councillors Voss and Gross for serving on the committee and doing the great work, and also thanks to the good work that's been done by the Audit and Risk Committee. There's a lot going on here, particularly under section 4.1.6. It details the things that are being reviewed at the moment, such as the councillor expense and support policy, the CX, and a number of organisational policy frameworks. This is a very important committee for council, and we thank the councillors that serve on it, as I always do when this report comes to council. It's a big job, and it's a very high risk and important job for a councillor to take on. So thanks for the good work, and hopefully you're finding lots of good stuff in your hard work.
Thank you, Councillor Pearl. Would anyone else like to speak? Then I will put that motion. All those in favour? Councillor Baxter?
4.
Councillor Bond?
4.
Councillor Brand?
4.
Councillor Copsey?
4.
Councillor Crawford?
4.
Councillor Gross?
4.
Councillor Pearl?
4.
Councillor Simic?
4.
And Councillor Voss, 4. That motion is unanimously carried. Thank you. Now we'll move to item 14.4, which is the Assemblies of Councillors. Councillors, do you have any questions of the officers? There are none. Then we have an officer's recommendation. Do I have a mover for that? Councillor Pearl got in early to move, yes, and Councillor Copsey to second. Oh, I missed one, did I? Someone's telling me. Okay, we'll come back to that. So I've gone to 14.4, which is the Assembly of Councillors. We've got a mover and a seconder, and I'm going to call that. I will now put the motion under division. Councillor Baxter?
4.
Councillor Bond?
4.
Councillor Brand?
4.
Councillor Copsey?
4.
Councillor Crawford?
4.
Councillor Gross?
4.
Councillor Pearl?
4.
Councillor Simic?
4.
And Councillor Voss, 4. That motion is unanimously carried. Now we'll go back to 14.3, which is the update on provision of carpentry and handyman services. Councillors, any questions? I'd just quickly like to ask a question. Mr. Johnson, what's happened here? Can you please describe the process that we've undergone for this item to come to council?
Yes, I can. Through you, Mayor. So earlier on, council's first meeting this year, we, due to procurement timelines across the December-January period when we have the Christmas and New Year shutdown, we undertook a procurement process for the handyman service, carpentry and handyman. We commenced a carpentry and handyman services procurement process. We came to council at the first council meeting of this year and requested that council delegate a temporary increase to the CEO's financial authority to allow the CEO to enter into a contract for carpentry and handyman services. At that time, we committed to council that we would bring back this report, which outlines the procurement process that was undertaken.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Any questions, councillors? If not, do we have a mover? See, Councillor Crawford got in there. Move. Councillor, do I have a seconder? Councillor Baxter, thank you. Councillor Crawford, would you like to speak to the motion? Councillor Baxter, would you like to speak to the motion? Would anyone else like to speak to the motion? Then I'll put that motion. All those in favour? Councillor Baxter?
For.
Councillor Bond?
For.
Councillor Brand?
For.
Councillor Copsey?
For.
Councillor Crawford?
For.
Councillor Gross?
For.
Councillor Pearl?
For.
Councillor Simic? Councillor Simic?
For.
Thank you. And Councillor Voss is a for. That motion is unanimous.
For.
Thank you. 14.5, Marlborough Street. Heads of agreement, housing first request for a variation. Councillors, do you have any questions of the officers? No? No questions? Question from Councillor Brand.
Thank you very much. Yes, I just wanted to have an officer just clarify the purpose of the slight modification that the officers have recommended be made to what Housing First originally thought on in terms of the soil testing. Just to make a comment on what officers recommend as a slightly better way to go about the question of contamination and what have you, and costs.
Thank you, Councillor Brand. Mr. Savinkov.
Through you, Madam Mayor. Under the heads of agreement, City of Port Phillip has no obligation to carry out this assessment, the detailed contamination assessment that we're proposing, nor does it have an obligation to pay the costs of such assessment. But what we're proposing is a proactive approach to give all parties confidence about the contamination profile of the site. There is still some uncertainty about the contamination profile. Some good work has been done previously, but this is like a jigsaw puzzle where we don't have all the pieces yet, and this exercise won't give us all the pieces, but it'll certainly fill some gaps.
Thank you, Mr. Savinkov. Any further questions? Then we have an officer's recommendation for 14.5. Do I have a mover for that or something different? Councillor Copsey to move. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Baxter to second. Thank you. Councillor Copsey, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yeah, I'll just reserve.
Thank you. Councillor Baxter? That's a no. Would anyone else like to speak to the motion? Councillor Pearl?
Thanks, Mayor Voss. I appreciate that. I'm voting against this on the basis of consistency. Ratepayers deserve the best possible outcome from this development, and society deserves the best possible outcome from this development also in terms of numbers of houses. So there's an economic component to it and there's a social component, and the only way we can balance those two components is if this project goes out to an open tender where multiple housing associations and people wishing to develop social housing or combined uses for the good of society will be able to tender to see what they can do with this site. Therefore, I think it's another opportunity where we can take stock of where we are and go out to market and do a fair and open tender process on this very important public site.
Thank you, Councillor Pearl. Councillor Bond.
I won't be supporting this project either. This project is financially unviable. It's been ongoing for 14 years without resolution. The City of Port Phillip and other organisations continue to throw money at this site. Previously, it was on planning investigations, then it was on apartment subsidies or proposed apartment subsidies. Now we're doing a site investigation into contamination on the site. This is just throwing good money after bad. The proposal's not viable. It should remain a car park until such point in time as a viable proposition comes along, and what's currently proposed for this site isn't it. So I won't be supporting this particular proposal for this site.
Thank you, Councillor Bond. Would anyone else like to speak? Councillor Copsey, would you like to close?
Yes, sorry, just getting my mute button. Pleased to support this evening. I think that the steps that the officers have outlined are very sensible. Council is very dedicated to making sure that we have a growing number of social housing units available in our city. It's a long-standing commitment of this council, one that extends far before this term. I think that the steps that have been requested are reasonable given some of the delays that have been associated with the project, which have been outside parties' control. I thank the representative for speaking earlier this evening and wanted to acknowledge and appreciate them participating over the technology this evening. I also think it's a very sensible step to investigate and make sure that this project is as shovel ready as can be. It's a really good prospect, excellently located for provision of social housing, and I'm pleased that this council is progressing our long-standing commitment to seeing a positive outcome from this site. So I'm happy to support the recommendation this evening and urge other councillors to do so as well. Everyone deserves a safe and secure place to call home, and this council will continue to play our part, I hope, in ensuring that becomes reality.
Thank you, Councillor Copsey. Then I'll put that motion. All those in favour or against? Councillor Baxter?
For.
Councillor Bond?
Against.
Councillor Brand?
For.
Councillor Copsey?
For.
Councillor Crawford?
For.
Councillor Gross?
For.
Councillor Pearl?
Against.
Councillor Simic?
For.
And Councillor Voss? For. That motion is carried. Thank you. Now we will move to the next item, which is 14.6, a register of decisions made by the CEO and the revocation of COVID emergency delegation. Councillors, do you have any questions of the officers? There are none. Then we have an officer's recommendation. Do I have a mover for that or something different? Councillor Simic to move. Councillor Baxter to second. Councillor Simic, would you like to speak to the motion?
I'd like to really just thank the CEO for acting with such oversight, careful oversight over the last period, and thank the organisation for the way that they've responded with extraordinary powers that were
Okay, you're breaking up, Councillor Simic. It's very difficult to hear you. Okay.
I'm happy to close there.
Thank you, Councillor Simic. Councillor Baxter, would you like to speak?
I would. Thank you, Mayor. Obviously, it was a very difficult decision to delegate the amount of powers that we did delegate for this council. And we had to really make sure that there were as many, safety valves in there as possible, so that we could make sure that we were doing our job properly. And I do want to thank the CEO for working with us to make sure that we felt comfortable with those safety valves, and to exercise his duties and his delegations with quite a lot of consultation. I know quite a lot of councillors, and I know quite a lot of people that work in local government right across the state, and I have to say I don't know any other CEO that has stayed in touch with and kept councillors in the loop as much as our CEO has, and really sort of made sure that we were across all sorts of things before delegated powers were used. So I'm quite pleased with how it's gone. I'm also very pleased to be able to revoke those emergency delegations, as I'm sure the CEO is as well, so that we can actually get back to doing our job. In the end, most of the really, I would say, big delegations were only in the circumstances that we couldn't meet, and we were able to continue meeting throughout the period. So there were delegated powers that the CEO exercised, but a lot of the really big ones, big decisions, we still were able to make as we continued to meet through that period. So I'm pleased with how it's gone. I'm pleased to revoke the emergency delegation, and you can breathe a bit of a sigh of relief, Peter. And yeah, that's me.
Thank you, Councillor Baxter. Would any Councillor Bond?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm very glad to return this council to the full control of this group of 9 councillors, for better or worse. We were elected by the community to serve in these roles and to make these decisions at all opportunities. We should never have delegated our roles and responsibilities to the CEO in the first place. This proved to be a premature and unnecessary decision, and it's with much pleasure that I vote to take back those controls from the CEO to us as a group of 9 councillors, and we get on with the job of governing this city as councillors for the remaining 4 or 5 months of this term of council.
Thank you, Councillor Bond. Any other councillor would like to speak to this item? I will just briefly say something as well, and I'd just like to thank the organisation, and in particular the CEO, for taking on such a huge responsibility in the time when our community was at a great need, and for all the commitment and the time and the extra work that has been needed by everyone over this time. Well done. We got through it. We're back here. We're in a virtual meeting, and we have now our full powers back. So thank you for taking them when it was needed, and for protecting us all. It's really appreciated. Councillor Brand, do you want to speak too?
Yes, thank you. I just want to, just for the record, just restate my belief that that this delegation was a perfectly sensible decision to make, and I totally agree with Councillor Bond that we are here to make decisions, to serve the community, to make decisions together at every opportunity. But we're in a time of extraordinary situations that there were definite prospects, either through illness or through technology problems, that we wouldn't be able to form a quorum to make essential decisions, that sometimes decisions have to be made absolutely in a timely way, not just whenever we get around to it. And so we needed to do this as a safety valve, and we've done it in a very considered way, with a very considered consultation with the CEO, and he reluctantly, I think, took on the powers to do that, and now he doesn't have to do it, which is good, because we're better organised, safer, and more equipped legislatively to carry on as councillors in all circumstances. So it is a terrific outcome now. Good. So thank you. And thank you for Mr. Smith for taking it on before.
Thank you, Councillor Brand. Any others? Then I will now put the motion under division and call upon each councillor to vote. Councillor Baxter.
Oh, I did just see that Councillor Copsey wanted to. Have we run out of time for that?
No, all right. We've just got in Councillor Copsey again.
Apologies, I was slow in sending. Look, Councillor Brandt has very succinctly summarised most of what I wanted to say. I think it's our role as a council to ensure, in the interests of good governance, that in the event we were unable to meet, which has, we've had a very uncertain time as a community and across the globe, really, in the last month. So I think that this was a very prudent measure to ensure that in the event that council was unable to form quorum, we still had measures in place to ensure that this city could have decision-making done for the interests of the community in a timely manner. So I think it's been very necessary, and I really did want to just take the opportunity to thank the CEO for his continued diligence in updating council. It's not just been during the period when these delegations were in motion. He's been keeping councillors up to date, and I also wanted to take the opportunity to thank not just the CEO but the organisation, who I know have been absolutely going above and beyond. We've had a rapid response with the emergency relief measures that were prepared quickly and have been delivered quickly to our community. And I think it's been very evident to me that we've got an organisation that is very committed to their role of ensuring best outcomes for our community. So I just wanted to take the opportunity to thank the CEO and the whole organisation for their efforts. We're not out of this yet, but hopefully we can start looking towards recovery as we move out of this emergency and crisis response period.
Thank you, Councillor Copsey. Then I will now, Councillor Simic would like to close.
Just to say, Mayor Voss, and remind for anyone that's watching from home that it was our mayor, it was our CEO that led a lot of the advocacy on behalf of the IMAP councils that made it possible for us to meet online, which made the powers that were delegated to the CEO redundant. So thank you, CEO, for your advocacy as well on behalf of all councils in Victoria for the state government to change this legislation so that we can meet online in a way that's safe for other councillors, but also safe for our officers, so that we're not exposing them to any undue circumstances. Thank you, CEO.
Thank you. Now, third time I'll put that motion under division. Councillor Baxter.
For.
Councillor Bond.
Very much for.
Councillor Brand.
For.
Councillor Copsey.
For.
Councillor Crawford.
For.
Councillor Gross.
For.
Councillor Pearl.
For.
Councillor Simic.
For.
And Councillor Voss, for. That motion is unanimously carried. Okay, 14.7, which is the proposed delegation to the CEO, which is the power to call special meetings. Councillors, do you have any questions of the officers? Just, I have a quick question, and that is if you could just outline why we are giving you some powers to call special meetings, Mr. CEO.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Mayor, I'll ask Ms Bennett to give a more detailed explanation. I think this is an omission in the new local government legislation, but Ms Bennett will provide a more thorough answer.
Thank you, Ms Bennett.
Through you, Madam. Yes.
You're very faint. If you could speak up a bit, please.
Apologies, Madam Mayor.
Great.
Through you, Madam Mayor, the CEO is correct. The sector was advised fairly recently that in the new Local Government Act, which has recently received royal assent, the section which enables the council to call special meetings had been omitted. The council in the meeting procedure local law, which you have, has followed what is considered best practice by the Ombudsman, not to repeat within that particular document items that are already covered in legislation. So hence, under the meeting procedure local law that the council is currently operating under, it doesn't make provision for calling of special meetings. Officers have inquired as to whether there is the ability to seek an exemption from needing to follow the entire process that you would normally follow to make an amendment to the meeting procedure local law. Unfortunately, we haven't received advice back on that yet, and in the event that we did, obviously this delegation would be revoked. We see this as just being a temporary measure. The delegation follows the same requirements in the old Act, and when Council adopts its governance procedures, which is required to do by September 2020, that will be able to be reflected in those governance procedures, and thus this delegation would no longer be required. Officers are currently working on an implementation plan and approach for implementing the Local Government Act. In terms of the timing for the governance procedures and those being adopted by Council, we are just currently waiting for the release of associated regulations because we want to make sure that your governance procedures are compliant with those. So therefore, we would just advise waiting to those so that we don't seek council endorsement of that and community consultation on those meeting procedures if they're not totally compliant with regulation that is then passed. So in terms of the limitations on this particular delegation, so the special meeting can only be called in the event that the mayor or 3 councillors give written notice of a request that that meeting be called. So as previously stated, the conditions within that delegation are the same conditions that are or that were in the Local Government Act of 1989.
Thank you, Ms Bennett. Councillors, do you have any further questions? Then we have an officer's recommendation. Do I have a mover for that? I'm happy to move. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Brand to second. I don't need to speak to this motion. Councillor Brand, did you want to speak to the motion?
No, I don't think so. It's pretty straightforward.
Would anyone else like to speak to the motion? Then I'll put that motion under division. All those in favour, Councillor Baxter?
For.
Councillor Bond?
For.
Councillor Brand?
For.
Councillor Copsey?
For.
Councillor Crawford?
For.
Councillor Gross?
For.
Councillor Pearl?
For.
Councillor Simic?
For.
Councillor Voss? For. That motion is unanimously carried. Thank you. Okay, we're getting to the end of the agenda now, but there's a big item here. 14.8, which is the Council Plan and Budget for 2020-2021, direction setting, revised in consideration of the impact of COVID-19 pandemic. Councillors, do you have any questions of the officers? Perhaps some of you could take up some of the questions from the submitters. Question from Councillor Brand?
Yes, I'd like to take up some of the questions from the submitters. I'd like, for instance, to take up the questions asked by Campbell Spence, I think. to do with the use of the general reserve funds to take funds from them for the super fund, the super fund item and the parking fund items. Just those questions about the suitability of those payments being taken from the general reserve funds.
So the $11 million of defined super benefit top-up.
Yes, that's much better expressed.
The funding the parking fines appeal funds meet
that's
the
right.
general reserve definition. Yep.
Yeah, somehow similar together. So there's a similar question for each.
Okay, great. Mr. Carroll.
Through you, Mayor. We do predominantly use the general reserve to fund major one-off investments like asset expenditure. However, we also maintain it to act as contingency to fund one-off issues such as a super call or a voluntary parking refund scheme. That does align with the 10-year financial plan that's contained in the council plan and budget, which specifically identifies the defined benefit super call as a risk and the use of cash reserves to fund this as a mechanism, and then for that to be replenished over time. In effect, it operates like a financing mechanism in that we use it to fund up front, then we repay that over time. That approach spreads the impact over time, helping us to achieve one of the key financial management principles in the Local Government Act that Council must seek to provide stability and predictability in the financial impact on our community. The repayment plan is built into the budget parameters that have been developed and essentially adds to the savings targets, which needs to be met from efficiency and cost savings or service level reductions over time. That replenishment of the reserve over time ensures the funds are built up again and that we ensure that we continue to spend money appropriately on infrastructure and other purposes in the future, including acting as a contingency for other unexpected large one-off impacts that would otherwise require a significant impact on the current community if it was to be funded in outright now.
Thank you, Mr. Carroll. And the parking fines appeal?
Through you, Mayor, it's a similar approach essentially. So it's similar to the super call. It's an unexpected large impact, but it is one-off, and therefore what we're seeking to do is utilising the reserve, which the council has approved to do previously to the 10-year financial outlook, to repay that now and then to pay that now and then to repay that and replenish the reserve over time. So we're spreading the cost impact over time.
Thank you. Councillor Simic, good question.
Sorry, Mayor, I just wanted to ask if officers can, the report talks a little bit about the process from here, but there was recently a town hall budget session that was held, and there will be another one. If officers can just outline the process from here on for anyone watching at home so that they know how they can participate in this process as well.
Thank you, Mr. Carroll. Are you able to answer that one?
Through you, Mayor, I can answer it, but I might defer to Mr. Ross. He's project managing the budget process and in particular the broader engagement processes and might be able to give a more comprehensive response, but otherwise alternatively I can respond.
Thank you.
Through you, Madam Mayor. So we held the first of two virtual town hall and Q&A sessions on the first one was on Monday night. We had around about 90 participants involved in that. We were basically talking about the financial context, the issues that Council's been going through as a result of COVID-19 and what it means in terms of developing the draft budget. There is a second one planned for that on Monday the 18th of May. It will be a similar approach with any updated information that we can provide at that particular session. So if anyone's interested in attending a second one, we encourage people to register for the second one as well. We are also looking at doing some targeted community engagement prior to the release of the draft the draft budget on a number of proposed service level reductions, which are included in attachment 2 of the report that you are looking at now. So we will come back with details on that, but the likely approach is going to be having some special sessions on our Have You Say website where people can talk about the specific proposal that's in place and how they feel about it and provide feedback that way. And what will happen is for all the items that have been put forward on the for the targeted community engagement, we'll report back to the councillors through a briefing on the feedback, the summary of the feedback we had received, and they can consider that prior to making the final changes to the budget.
Thank you, Mr. Ross. Councillor Crawford.
I've got a couple of questions, if I may. Well, one was to take up. I think it was. I can't remember actually who mentioned it. My understanding is that we are using as current data in these uncertain times as we can to do this 10-year proposal, and it isn't old data. It's using what's as up to date as we possibly can. Is that correct?
Through you, Mayor, that question came from Christina Sirikoff from the ratepayers at Port Phillip. I think the specific question that you're referring to was, do councillors agree that council should be using historical data to create the 10-year forecast rather than using updated data that accounts for the current unprecedented in our lifetime economic climate? Perhaps a pessimistic scenario which results in another 33 million of budget problems over the 10-year outlook is more appropriate. Councillors, the 10-year financial outlook does look ahead and does look at what we're forecasting to happen into the future, and it certainly does incorporate what we anticipate to be the outcomes or the expected impacts from COVID-19, and hence why we've taken this unprecedented step of bringing back the 10-year financial outlook for you to review only a few months post having adopted it last year. So we would normally only do it in December each year, and because of COVID-19 we started having discussions with you in March, and then we've brought this back to you in May for a revised financial outlook that specifically that takes into account COVID-19. So I think we don't solely rely on historical data. That would not be prudent, but that's not what we've done.
Okay, thank you. So that's the first one. The other thing in regards to the 10-year plan, so obviously if things were to improve in terms of our revenue with parking or wherever over time, then there would be room, because we were constantly updating our 10-year plan to put in some of the programs that perhaps we are delaying or reducing for now. So that is the idea. So just because it's nominated as being reduced in the 10-year plan at the moment doesn't mean it's gone forever. It just means if things were to remain the same, these are the kind of decisions we're making, but we're constantly reviewing it. Is that correct?
Through you, Mayor, that's absolutely correct. You will note that we are constantly adjusting our forecast based on what's actually happening and based also on updated advice about what might happen in the future. So we initially started with, we thought there would be around $19 million of revenue impacts this financial year. We've forecast that reduction down based on how performance has actually been going, and that we didn't go into the level of restrictions that we thought we would, although we are still conservative about next year, as we do think there'll still be long impacts as we come out of the restrictions, and that it will take a long time for those restrictions to go back to normal. But we also have we will continue to update the budget based on best information as we work through both the draft and the final budget process over the next few months with you and the community. And then, as you know, we already have a monthly reforecasting process where we outline the CEO's report, any changes that have been happening, both in terms of progress, but also new opportunities and responding to issues. And then we also run a quarterly budget review. Now, into the future, our proposal is that next year in particular, those quarterly budget reviews will be more deep than they have been in the past, to take into account the uncertainty of the environment that we're in now and the need to continuously review our position, but also if things are better than anticipated, to potentially bring forward some of that expenditure where we can that's been deferred.
Thank you. Sounds very prudent. The final question I wanted to just clarify, because I'm not sure if it's, even if we make these budget reductions in this next year budget and for the 10-year forecast, it's not going to decrease people's rates because that's still dependent mainly on the value of their home, isn't it? We are going to be careful about what kind of decisions we're making. But I just want to clarify, because I think there might be some expectation that rates will drop dramatically, but that is a separate equation to the decisions we're making in regards to the 10-year plan.
Through you, Mayor. Yeah, it's the mechanics of rates is always confusing to people. Essentially, what we're proposing is, as you adopted previously in the previous 10-year financial outlook and your financial strategy, that we continue to target a rates increase within the rates cap, so that's 2%, and then we're forecasting that we'll remain within that for the full financial outlook. Now that's subject to decision making by council each year, and the rates cap is determined by government in December or January each year as well. But essentially, what happens in terms of how rates is then distributed amongst people is based on property values. Now, property values will fluctuate from year to year, and we now have an annual revaluation cycle. And so as the value of a person's property changes, their share of the rate pie also changes. But overall, that pie will be increasing by 2% next year. It might just be distributed differently between individual ratepayers based on the value of their property.
Thank you. That's my three questions.
Thank you, Councillor Crawford. Councillor Pearl.
Just to segue onto that answer, if I could, Mayor Voss, you said there that will increase by 2% next year, and under 4.3, you've got the assumption here that we will be increasing rates by the rate cap. When will council be making a formal decision whether or not we will be increasing our rate next year?
Through you, Mayor. So, council initially made, and it set its original direction setting for the council plan and budget in December when it looked at the outlook back then, and agreed as part of that we would not be seeking an above rates cap increase, which we need to do. We need to notify the government at that point in time. At this stage, we are seeking reapproval of the general direction that was set then, which included sticking with the rates cap. Council will make its final decisions around, or its proposed decision around the rates cap again when it comes to the draft budget, and then we'll finalise its decision on the final budget. But this is the direction that we're working to at the moment, unless council makes a different decision tonight.
Thank you. Mr. Carroll, Councillor Brand.
Thank you. Look, some of this has been answered sort of in some of the previous answers, but I'd just like to get a sort of a direct, clear answer. We're in a sort of a thicket of budgets and consultations and reports and reviews, and it's very confusing for the general public and for some of us closer to the action as well. Just can you, an officer please just outline the relationship of this 10-year review, which includes a whole lot of proposed budget cuts and things that look like budget decisions and what have you, the relationship of this report tonight to the draft budget which is due to be presented in the middle of June. Just so people know where they are navigating what we're doing at each stage, or at least what we're navigating at this stage compared to what we will be navigating on the 17th of June.
Through you, Mayor, this this report essentially sets direction for the budget. So each year when officers go about preparing the budget on behalf of the councils, what we try to do is make sure that you and the community have the best available information at the start of that process about our current financial position and other priorities and external factors, internal factors that will influence budget development. So you can see, and we talk about some of the external factors, but also some of the internal factors and our revised financial position, the starting point. In this particular case, we've had to take into consideration the impact of COVID-19. So our starting point is drastically different to what we anticipated it was going to be in December. And our forecast position over the next 2 years, 3 years is also different because of the impact of COVID-19. So this is outlining that transparently for the council, but also then it's getting approval from you on the direction that officers should be taking in helping to develop that budget, the draft budget for you. So you'll see in here a range of parameters and directions that we're asking you to endorse or to approve, and we'll go about developing the budget as we already are in accordance with those parameters. It's important that we have a clear direction when we set the budget, otherwise we can waste a lot of time and effort on things that aren't going to be considered or that are wasting both your time and our time in developing. In this particular case, which is a little bit different to how we would normally do the 10-year financial outlook, because of our financial situation, not only in the temporary nature with COVID-19, but also because of other factors like the recycling crisis, the waste and recycling crisis, increases in our insurance costs above CPI, and increases in some of our key contracts, service contracts above CPI and therefore above the rates cap. We do need to make some permanent ongoing reductions to our budgets. Now, we've done some of that through efficiency savings. We've got a proud history as an organisation of year on year contributing efficiency savings. We've added another 3 million so far this year, but that won't be enough. We need to do more, but it won't all come from efficiency savings. So tonight we're also asking you to look at some preliminary service level reduction options and to endorse officers engaging on those service level reductions before the draft budget, so as part of this process now, and to report back to you in June on the outcomes of that so that we can achieve some early savings to help fund both the COVID-19 problem that we have, but then the broader financial issues that we have. That is a little bit different to how we normally approach it, but that's important from our perspective. There's around $900,000 worth of potential savings options there for councils. Now, we're not asking you to approve those tonight, we're asking you to endorse us having a conversation about those and reporting back on the outcomes of those conversations before they're made. This then feeds into the draft budget, which will be put out to the community through its normal process. Now, so despite COVID-19, what we are trying to do now is normalise the process and just, even though it's to a different time frame than what we'd normally run, we've had this special additional council plan and budget outlook update. We are now trying to run a normal budget process. So that'll go to the draft budget, which we will consult with the community on before council finalises the budget in mid-August.
Thank you, Mr. Carroll. I've got a question. I'd like to take up one of Mrs. Sirikov's comments around or statements that council has disclosed that they will apply to the Essential Services Commission to raise rates by more than the rates caps to fund the Fisherman's Bend funding gap. She talks about in the context of the catastrophic risk rating. Can you confirm where she might have got that information that we will be applying to the Essential Services Commission to raise rates? Because I don't know anything about that.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I'm not sure. That's not, okay. As this report clearly states, we haven't, and we won't be. We're not planning to ask to go for an above rates cap increase. What it is available for is that if it's in terms of options for a future council, would be in terms of it could consider in terms of long-term financial sustainability and how it might deal with things like Fisherman's Bend. It may well, a future council may well choose to seek an above rates cap rates increase, but that isn't part of our 10-year financial plan or the financial outlook that we're proposing tonight or the budget direction setting for next financial year.
Okay. Thank you. And I believe it says it pretty clearly in 4.4.3, actually. I'm now seeing that the word not perhaps was overlooked. Councillor Pearl.
And sorry about the chat, Mayor. I think I've done everything from move to second to ask another question, so apologies for that. I got the right key eventually. I don't have the questions in front of me, but I'm hoping the officers do because they got circulated around. But just questioning, do we answer Mr. Armstrong's questions from some couple of hours ago?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I do have them in front of me, so I'm happy to answer them. Just give me a minute.
Could you take them up? As in, I don't have them in front of me, but I think if people have gone to the effort to ask the questions, we should answer each one.
Yeah.
Two of those have been answered already.
Yeah, I think the first question is, are councillors aware that contrary to 4.4.1, the City of Port Phillip is one of only a handful of councils that treat the private good of waste services as a public good? Are councils aware that this is expressly against the Local Government Better Practice Guide 2014 Revenue and Rating Strategy, which states that it's more appropriate to cover the cost of services that are predominantly private good characteristics for user pay charges and use property rates to offset the cost of public goods? I think this is a question that the councillors have been grappling with officers for several years, and prior to COVID-19, councillors did agree to start our conversation with the community, and we started embarking on community engagement around the potential to resolve some of the waste and recycling crisis issues. And one of the mechanisms that we engaged on was a partial or full waste charge, which would have which could have potentially seen those who are receiving that paying for it directly. Now, because of COVID-19, we don't think now is the right time to be trying to have a big conversation about that with the community. And instead, what we are trying to do is find as many savings as we can in the budget to enable council to increase its investment in waste and recycling in the short term. But as we've indicated in the outlook, longer term, we will need to either look at bigger service level reductions or alternative funding sources such as a waste charge to maintain financial sustainability while achieving council's objectives around waste and recycling, unless council determines it wants to change its objectives. Another question, question 2 from Mr. Armstrong, was instead of borrowing from the future and deferring spending, in order to balance the budget, will councils instead consider the much harder task of reprioritising expenditure and upcoming spending programs and projects to those that the community would consider essential and those that provide the most public benefit or bang for bucks? Will the results of the zero-based budget exercise be made public? Perhaps council's apparent strategy of simply borrowing from the future as wide as recommended for years that those ratepayers who can't afford their rates should simply defer them to a later date, effectively reverse mortgaging their property. The response to that is council is taking a prudent and balanced approach to addressing the challenges of COVID-19 and the waste and recycling crisis while trying to keep rates and charges affordable, looking after our over $3.3 billion worth of community assets and continuing to provide highly valued community services. And this importantly includes during COVID-19 and after, providing support, targeted support to those ratepayers, residents and businesses that need it the most. Our approach does not include borrowings, not next year and not in the 10-year financial outlook. However, it has been highlighted that borrowings is a potential contingency for council if a future council chooses to do that. And there are significant constraints around how we would do that or how any council would do that. And it's certainly not part of the proposals that we've got in front of council tonight or in our 10-year financial plan. Our approach instead includes continuing commitment to efficiency and cost savings, which I've previously talked about tonight. A reduction in projects, a temporary reduction in project expenditure. Well, much of this is temporary and it's not lost, and it's not lost for 10 years. It's actually only been deferred in most cases over the next couple of years and will be caught up over the 10-year plan period. There are some savings that we have made through that exercise through reprioritisation and reduced scope, but the majority of it is temporary reductions to ensure that we continue to look after our $3.3 billion worth of community assets, not only for the current, but also future generations. We have been reviewing service levels, and councillors are starting to have to make some tough decisions around temporary or permanent reductions to services. And tonight you do have in front of you a preliminary range of options totaling around $900,000 that we're asking you to permit engagement on before having to make some final decisions. But no doubt there will be more options being put to you as part of the draft budget process to ensure we maintain our long-term financial sustainability. And we're also proposing to use appropriate use of reserves, largely to fund infrastructure projects, but also for some one-off costs and replenishing these over time. That is a prudent and balanced approach to how you deal with a crisis. The zero-based budgeting exercise is being driven by a hierarchy of funding principles based on a level of discretion and priority. The results will be included in the draft budget, which will be released to the public for consultation, insofar as it will be reflective in the cost savings, the service level reductions and the FTE reductions that come from that process. Council is proud of the support it provides ratepayers in financial hardship, which is greater than many, if not all, other Victorian councils, and has been for a very long time. That is also reflected in the fact that we have a very high collection ratio of over 98%. We are and we will continue to look at options to further strengthen our support for those in financial hardship as part of the budget development process. The third question from Mr. Armstrong was, may we assume that if council chooses to introduce a new levy to fund the $64 million gap for waste, that this levy will be in addition to the existing rate space? Or is the opposite true, that every dollar of waste levy collected in total, council will reduce rates collected in total by $1? The response to this is that a decision on the introduction of the waste levy will be made by future council following consultation with the community. There will be a number of different options available to a future council when they consider that. But essentially that'll boil down to no levy, a partial levy to potentially cover the cost of waste increases above the rates cap, in which case rates would stay the same, or a shift of all eligible waste costs to being funded by a waste charge, in which case at the point of this change, rates would be reduced commensurately.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Carroll. That was a very comprehensive answer to Mr. Armstrong's questions. Councillor Brand, you had a question next.
No, I'm going to withdraw that. It was too much detail. We're under the big picture at the moment.
Okay.
So that's good.
Thank you. Any other questions, councillors? I would like to ask a question. Oh, actually, Councillor Copsey.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Carroll, for very comprehensive responses so far, and thanks to the community members who have raised these questions. I'm really heartened to see so much participation. My question is, there was reference to the risk rating of catastrophic, which is then tempered and addressed in relation to funding gap potential in Fisherman's Bend. This is an issue that councillors are very mindful of as well, and I was wondering if officers could give some responses around the factors that are leading to the potential risk rating there and the measures that council is taking to address it.
Through you, Mayor. I think the council, the community, the state all have really high aspirations for the unique opportunity that Fisherman's Bend presents us. So the level of services and investment to achieve that aspiration, particularly in an area that's unfortunately flood prone and contaminated, and with high land costs because of decisions made by past state governments before anyone had an opportunity to purchase any land outside of the private landholders down there, means that it's an exceptionally costly development exercise if we want to achieve those multifaceted aspirations for Fisherman's Bend and fully realise the opportunity that sits there for us, Australia's largest urban renewal project. So that in itself poses a risk if it's untreated, a fairly large risk in that if we were to try and achieve those aspirations without having funding certainty, then we'd be exposing ourselves to significant financial risk. However, in terms of how we mitigate that risk, there are a range of controls that council has in place. The first one and foremost is that council can make its own decisions at the end of the day about service levels that it wishes to support and the level of expenditure that is willing to put in. Secondly, but what that does do is a trade-off then between what we're willing to spend and the outcomes that can be achieved in the short, medium and longer term. Secondly, though, is we're working with the state. The state has primary responsibility for the development of Fisherman's Bend. They've taken away some of the responsibilities that we would normally have, and they've also taken away some of the funding sources that we'd normally have available to us. So we're working really closely with the state in how we plan for, fund and finance development there. And we're trying to influence that as much as we can. And councils have been directly involved in that process over the past 3 or 4 years at least. We will continue to do that work to try and get the best balance between achieving those high-level outcomes and aspirations and making sure it's affordable for current and future ratepayers. I think that we have included the risk in the outlook, but it's hard for us to actually quantify what that risk looks like because it's just so uncertain and the planning framework hasn't been evolved enough. Now, there is some work going on at the moment about the timing of that framework and how we might package up future work, and the CEO is directly leading the work on Fisherman's Bend with support of his executive team. But we are doing everything we can to make sure that we can achieve the balance between the vision that this council and the state has shared, while also making sure it's affordable. And we are incorporating it in our financial outlook to make sure that we are aware of it, that we don't make bad decisions, and that we also will be reviewing our financial outlook and our 10-year financial plan on an ongoing basis to incorporate better information as it comes to light and make good decisions about our level of investment.
Councillor Copsey?
Yes, thank you. I just had one more quick one. Mr. Carroll, you've spoken about the proposed service level reductions that are going out this evening. Should this be endorsed for some initial consultation? I just wondered if you could also comment on there's also a range of capital project proposals, and similarly just wanted to get clarity on I think it's been partially answered, but just wanting to see confirmation that the decision around funding will ultimately occur in the budget, but this report this evening gives community members an idea and some parameters of what council is currently considering, which they can comment on throughout the budget process, particularly in relation to capital projects. Can you just confirm if that's correct?
So through you, Madam Mayor, the proposals to the changes to the capital program we have included in the baseline, but we're very transparent about it. Now, the final decisions on what the capital program looks like for next year will be subject to community consultation. So we will go out with a draft budget, which will incorporate the proposed capital and operating projects for next year in detail, like it always does. And the community will have an opportunity to provide input and feedback on that before councils make their final decisions. Now, in some cases, because of the timing of the financial year, etc., it'll be hard to unwind some of the forecasts that we're currently making, but there could be some partial adjustments to those.
Okay, any further questions, councillors?
Mayor, you're very quiet all of a sudden.
Sorry about that. Is that better? Okay, thank you. Any further questions, councillors? All right, then we have an officer's recommendation. Do I have a mover for that or something different? Don't all jump at once. Councillor Crawford, thank you for moving. And do I have a seconder? Councillor Simic to second, thank you. Councillor Crawford, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, just quickly, thank you to the officers for the huge amount of work that has gone into this in a very uncertain time and pulling together such a big forward-looking document so we can be transparent with our community. We do have, as a council, some really tough decisions coming up. I guess we're the first council to face a pandemic and what that means for revenue. And so we look forward to you perusing this document, but also to the budget process. As I said, it is not going to be easy for us to make some really hard decisions. But they do have to be made in order for us to be financially sustainable and for us to still provide services and look after this great municipality that we live in. So again, thank you to the officers, and yes, it is interesting times that we are making budgets in.
Thank you, Councillor Crawford. Councillor Simic.
Since we've been working from home, I think virtually on a weekly basis, we've been talking to our officers about the financial position that the City of Port Phillip is in and looking at how we will progress the circumstances that we find ourselves in. The budget shortfall that we're talking about and looking at the moment is incredibly significant. There will be some really tough choices for us to make. But I know that the information that's being presented to us is of the highest caliber, and officers really have done a tremendous job over a very short period of time to provide us the best possible information. We're not the only ones going through really difficult circumstances. I think virtually every workplace, every non-government organisation, artists, people experiencing hardship, and they are across the country, and council is not immune of the economic impacts of COVID-19. But we will get through this, and through very careful planning and work, we will get through this together. So thank you to the officers for tonight's report, and look forward to a continued conversation with our community about what the things are that they want us to prioritise. And we have such a diverse community with diverse views, and I look forward to listening to those views as part of the process from here.
Thank you, Councillor Simic. Councillor Pearl.
Thanks very much, Mayor Voss. Sorry, pardon me. I'd like to move an amendment if possible. I'll put the
Councillor Pearl, you've gone off line.
I'd just like to move an amendment, Mayor Voss. I've just put the amendment up on the chat, so I don't know how I put myself back on the mute there.
Okay. Would you like to read what your amendment is? And
Yeah,
we'll...
happy to do that. Just to add at the end, a very short and simple one, 9.3, officers to provide councillors with a no rate increase option when developing budget 2020/21.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Bond to second. Would you like to speak to your motion, Councillor Pearl?
Thanks, Mayor Voss. Appreciate that. These are a simple amendment put up. It doesn't tie council at all to making a rate decision, which we heard tonight we haven't made in terms of what we're doing with the rate for the budget 2021. What this does do is ensures that we use the extension of time that the state government has provided us to develop our budget to ensure that we consider all range of options for our community. And secondly, it also provides our community with the comfort that they know that we're doing everything possible and everything we possibly can within our budget to help their household budgets as well. So this is a very simple amendment that provides officers with a lot of flexibility and councillors comfort that we're not being tied to a certain position. I think it's a great enhancement to the motion that we're considering this evening, and I strongly urge you to support it.
Thank you, Councillor Pearl. We just require a little clarification before we go to seconding, hearing from Councillor Bond. Offers to provide councillors with a no rate increase option when developing the budget.
Yeah, officers. Did I read it?
Officers.
I said offers, did I? So I've typed offers, but
I'm not sure, actually, I can't remember, but you do mean officers.
So 3.9 is officers to provide councillors with a no rate increase option when developing budget 2020/21.
Okay, and that's what's in red, so I confirm that. Thank you. There's a clarifying question, which I might take before I go to Councillor Bond.
Thank you, Mayor. If this is accepted, how would it work in practice? At what point will the community see that information as part of the suite of information that they'll be providing feedback on, noting that some of that process is already underway?
Mr. Carroll.
Through you, Mayor. It will provide some challenges for us in presenting the information on the draft budget, but not insurmountable. So we could develop an option for councillors to consider as part of the draft budget. And council may wish to engage with the community on such an approach as part of the draft budget as well. But it would add some complexity and potentially some confusion, but it's not insurmountable.
Okay, thank you. Now, before I go to Councillor Baxter, because he's also got a clarifying question, Councillor Pearl, can we please, would you be happy if we put in requests officers?
Yeah, that's fine. It's literally something I've drafted up this evening, so that's absolutely fine.
Thank you. We'll just add that in. Another clarifying question from Councillor Baxter.
Don't we look at all of this stuff through the budget process anyway? I mean, isn't this, if a councillor requested this sort of information on what it would look like if we didn't raise rates, wouldn't that information be available to us? I'm just not sure why we're specifically asking for it.
Mr. Carroll, are you able to clarify that we'll be looking at this specific, will we get this information as part of the budget process?
Through you, Mayor, yes, we do. We have frequently looked at what would be the implications of a no rate increase. So we looked at various scenarios around rates increases with councillors over the past few years, including in developing the 10-year financial outlook. We haven't gone so far as to say, well, if you did do it, here is specifically the additional service reductions or expenditure cuts that you would need to make to do it. And that would be, I guess, the additional work that we would need to do and present to councillors.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Carroll. Councillor Bond, we'll go to you. You're the seconder. I'm assuming you're happy with those small additions to start with?
I'm very happy with those small additions, Madam Mayor. I don't think councillors need to be told that our community is hurting. Business and residents are suffering financially. We can either be, as a council, tone deaf to these needs and this suffering by putting up our rates, or we can try to investigate an option that responds to our community's needs. Across the board, we're seeing organisations from the current state government all the way through to the banks and other service organisations making decisions not to put up their fees and charges in this current environment. I personally believe that the state government's going to step in and make this decision for us anyway, in a matter of weeks, so that we won't have a choice in the ability to put up our rates. But I think it would be great for us to sit here as councillors and make this decision without having the state government make that for us, and give our officers of our organisation instructions to go out and investigate a budget that does not increase the rates on our community. I've been contacted by many residents and many business owners saying, please, please do not put up your rates this year, I cannot afford it. And I think us as councillors, the very least we can do is at least investigate this option and have officers come back to us with an option for a zero rate rise budget. It would be I think it would be fantastic for us to go out to our community and say to them, we have heard you, we've heard that you're suffering, we've heard that you're in financial difficulty, we've heard that you're in financial pain, we're not putting up our rates this year. So I urge my fellow councillors to support this option, to support this direction to officers to investigate this option. It is not approving the option. You'll still have another opportunity to do that in the coming weeks and months, but it's asking officers to listen to the community and say, we at least will give this some consideration instead of closing that door on that particular option here tonight. So I urge my fellow councillors to support this and give us the option of not putting up our rates, not putting up not increasing the burden on the community, our residents, our businesses in the coming months.
Thank you, Councillor Bond. Now, Councillor Brand, you would like to speak to the motion, to the amendment.
Yes, to the amendment. Yes, I won't be supporting this amendment, even though I see no harm in actually going through the process of finding extra cuts to extra services, extra expenditure, extra whatever it is, to save more money than we might. It's 2% is out of rates is not a lot of money. I think from memory it's about 2.7 million. But there are two reasons why I wouldn't be recommending that we specifically try to do that. One is it is actually easy. Well, not easy. It is relatively easy. It's very difficult actually, but relatively easy to find another $2.7 million worth of cuts. But the question of the rates cap is not just a matter of that quantum of money. It is actually about how we sustain budgets over the next 10 years and beyond, because the rates cap is a strange instrument that is like a backwards ratchet that we can't ever catch up with again if we don't spend to the rates cap. It's like if we agreed that we would increase our rates on average at CPI, I think that'd be fine, and it means if we had a really difficult year like this year, where we could say we'll go below average this year or back to zero, that that in 2 years' time we could go up to 4% to make it back up again, that'd be fine. But we're not allowed to do that. Every time we don't meet the rates cap, we lose that capacity permanently. And
Councillor Brand, you seem to have frozen.
Oh my goodness. Well, I can still.
No, I've still got Councillor Brand.
Sorry, he's fine.
Okay, thank you. So at least somebody might be able to hear me. So it is the big question about a zero rates rise rather than a rates capped rate rise is not the actual quantity of money. It's about the whole process of how we structure the future of our budgets and how we try to meet this challenge of this backwards ratchet that's happening all the time as our expenses increase faster than, for business as usual, increase faster than the rates cap itself. The other reason is because when you take a quantum of money like $2.7 million, that just about equals one of what we started off as our business relief package, which actually targeted businesses in trouble in deep trouble with the current economic crisis, and we targeted it in a way that relieved them of having to pay rates right now. We paid back fees that they had paid that they are not going to use, a whole lot of stuff like that, which has cost about that amount of money. One way of achieving a zero rates rise would be to retract that particular relief program. It'd be easy. We could just go back to zero and not offer any of that relief to businesses. We can do better than that still, but I would prefer to be giving rates relief to people who need the rates relief. Like, for instance, in terms of businesses, we don't need to give rates relief to Coles and Woolies at the moment. They're doing really well, bless their hearts. I mean, they're really important. It's really important they're doing well. We don't need to give them rates relief. We don't need to do rates relief generalised across the whole board. We need to be able to target the people who are actually in hardship and give double the amount to them and none of that to the people who aren't in hardship. So I just think, if we really are serious about giving relief to ratepayers, we should do it in a targeted way and not just as a general percentage cut across the board. So that's why I'm not against doing the experiment, but I'm not really interested in pursuing it as a seriously entertained proposed method or the way forward.
Thank you, Councillor Brand. Councillor Simic.
I don't want to get into a debate now as to whether we should increase our rates and by how much or not. That decision doesn't need to be made tonight. I'm really thoroughly confused with this proposal. While I support us looking at all the different options, I just want to point out that we do that anyway, and we have been. And in the briefings that officers have been bringing to us in the last weeks, we have been looking at the different options and the impact that the different rate rises would have on council. So we do this anyway, and for councillors to suggest that we don't, it is a little bit disingenuous and not a true reflection of what happens in the work that we do as councillors with our officers. So while in principle I don't disagree with the amendment, the intention behind the amendment is not something I can support tonight. But I do want people to know that are listening tonight that we do this and we do talk to our community about this. One thing that I really want to avoid as a council is for us to have even more conversations about services that we need to cut. We've already had to start those conversations because there are services that we will need to cut. And every time we cut a service, be it one of our aged care services, our childcare services, any of the important services that council provides, people begin to hurt. And we have a responsibility as councillors to protect all of our community and do that responsibly. I want to thank my fellow councillors because it has been a really tough few weeks and months indeed, and everybody's been working really collaboratively together to overcome the tremendous budgetary burden that we face. But as we move forward, I call on all of my councillors, my fellow councillors, to do so in the best interest of council, to continue to work collaboratively, because now more than ever we need to pull together.
Thanks, Councillor Simic. Now we'll move to Councillor Crawford.
I think making $40 million of savings over to this next year is a pretty big step forward in terms of looking at where we can reduce our spending. I won't be supporting this motion for two reasons. We do consider it all the time. I know that in some sort of periphery talks that we've had, it wouldn't end up being targeted, but also it probably proportionally is like $35 in individuals' pockets, which it means nothing for a lot of people. And then collectively that money can be a much more effective, put to effective use in our community, like the targeted traders. We've already refunded footpath trading and things like that, where our arts community has been completely decimated and will continue to be decimated. I'd rather use that money to try and help them stay afloat, to keep this community. The municipality is built on the back of artists, and that's why people come here, and, using that money in a more targeted way to help keep that creative culture alive in Port Phillip would be a better outcome. And the other reason I won't be supporting this amendment is that I think it gives people, or certain people, a false idea that your rates will be radically reduced. The value of your house will determine the proportional amount that you pay in your rates. So you might not see any kind of reduction whether we took it or not. So I just think it's very hard to understand how rates are lobbied. I'm sure officers, if you want to email me, I'll find some information for you, but I won't be supporting it because you probably won't notice it in your rates thing. But if you're in trouble, we're going to help delay payment against the house. There are lots of mechanisms if you're in hardship. We want to support our traders. We want to support our artists. We want to provide you with parks. We want to provide you, with a great foreshore and services that make our community cohesive, because that's the thing I've noticed most in the pandemic, is our community coming together. And council needs money. Unfortunately, I wish we could magic it out of somewhere, but we can't. We have to, in order to provide these great services and to provide this great municipality, it does require some money. So I won't be supporting the amendment on those principles.
Thank you, Councillor Crawford. Councillor Gross.
Okay, here we go. I've got a different view. So, fellow councillors, I'm probably not going to support this, essentially because of the reasons I'm about to enumerate, but also I would like to thank Councillors Bond and Marcus for at least provoking us to think about the financial levers of local government financing. Now, this is all basic stuff, and I apologise, but there are, a certain number of financial levers that we've got to play with: revenue, including rates, borrowing, grants, savings, and service levels. And every budget we do this, we play with those financial levers, and we try to come up with an answer that balances the budget. We're not the federal government. The federal government can not balance the budget, according to Keynesian principles, if it wants to, but we have to. So we have to balance our budget unless we plan to do so in a way that is responsible in the coming years. So of those financial levers, the first one, revenue, that's been attacked both by the deferral but not loss of rates, and but the loss of other revenue. We've already talked about curbside trading and parking and other forms of revenue that this council receives. The second financial lever is borrowing. To borrow money for operational deficits would be fatal. And I know that there is, that would basically prepare us for amalgamation with a nearby council, because we would, within a decade, become not insolvent, but near as well to it. Then there are grants. Well, moves are being made to increase the grants to councils, and I hope they're successful. And the increase of the FAGs hopefully will lead to some grant income for councils like us. The final two are savings and service levels. And I think that's where I want to take this debate. And the word that comes to mind is compounding. When we make a decision in this budget, it will resound through the ages for our communities. And I want to pick up something that Councillor Brand said about compounding. Over a decade, 2%, if we forego 2% of our revenue income, then that becomes a hell of a lot of money, 2% on 2% on 2%. Now, the argument against that is that, well, not only does our 2% loss of rates compound, but also our total financial position compounds. And, you know, over time, that 2%, which starts at $2.5 billion. Yeah. You know, over the next 10 years, we'll be spending $2.5 billion. And so maybe you could argue that we could afford to forego that 2%. But I sort of am very squeamish about taking that risk. So compounding is a really important notion that we need to take into account. And it does scare me. And it does mean that everything we do resounds through the year. So the legacy I would like to leave this council is a more efficient, leaner legacy where our council does the stuff it wants to do and does it efficiently and well. And as we've talked about over the whole conversation, we've made incredible savings, and we're going to have to make some more savage savings over the rest of this conversation. Now, the other thing I want to address is that this is perhaps the wrong time to do zero increase to rates because of the impecunious state we find ourselves in because of the COVID crisis. And finally, I want to talk about how do we deal with suffering and financial distress. Well, as Chris alluded to, we have a largely aimed at pensioners who are notoriously asset rich but income poor. The way we provide a safety net for those people is the best in the business, to my way of thinking. So I would rather target our compassion through our pensions test and do it that way. I'd also like to, but I agree with what Tim said that, you know, why are we scared to pass 3.9 when we're going to do it anyway? We're going to talk about if we raise or lower all of those 5 financial levers. I suppose the issue is about expectations. What are the expectations for the community if 3.9 goes in? And I suppose it's sort of saying, holding out expectations for a result that's unlikely to go ahead. But as I say, I still think it's a worthwhile conversation to have, and I thank Councillors Pearl and Bond for forcing us to have this conversation. But at this stage, because of the issue of compounding and the availability of other levers, I will probably vote against it.
Thank you, Councillor Gross. Councillor Baxter.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'll be opposing this amendment because, contrary to what Councillor Pearl said in terms of giving options to the officers, this does no such thing. The options already exist. The officers and the councillors look at the budget from all angles. They look at all of the levers that Councillor Gross spoke about. The effect of this amendment would be to restrict the options to councillors and officers to essentially a budget and an alternate budget. Now, there's no real value in narrowing it down to just that unless some councillors wanted to go and champion an alternate budget and make some sort of political point. But for me, I think that the more important thing is that we actually get the budget process right, that we look at all angles within the one process rather than having officers look at two different sorts of views. We should look at what is actually best for the community. The community have been very clear to me that they fear service cuts. I've had some people say to me that they are worried about rate rises, but most people are really concerned about service cuts. They see that as being just a huge whack to their the way they live their life, which is already in so much turmoil. So, having said that, I haven't come in and demanded that officers come back with an option for no service cuts. That would be immature and irresponsible, and therefore I've continued to stick with working with the rest of councillors in a collaborative fashion to look at all of the different options, rather than demanding any particular scenarios from officers. So I think that we should continue to do that collaborative approach, work together, not try to score political points, and try and get the best for our community.
Thank you, Councillor Baxter. Anybody else wanting to speak? Councillor Pearl, would you like to close?
Thanks, Mayor Voss.
Point of order.
Just to retort a couple of points from
I'm
staff.
really sorry to interrupt.
Councillor Pearl, sorry, there's been a point
Sorry,
of
I'm
order.
really sorry to interrupt, Mayor. This is an amendment. We're not voting on the substantive.
Correct.
There's no right of reply, I believe.
You are correct, Councillor Simic. My mistake. It is an amendment. Thank you for calling that. And there isn't any right of reply on amendment. So I will put that to the vote under division. So we're only voting on the amendment here. Councillor Baxter.
Against.
Councillor Bond.
Very much for, Madam Mayor.
Councillor Brand.
Against.
Councillor Copsey.
Against.
Councillor Crawford.
Against.
Councillor Gross.
Against.
Councillor Pearl.
For.
Councillor Simic.
Against.
Councillor Voss. For. That motion has been lost, and so we'll revert to the substantive motion. We'd heard from a number of people, Councillor Copsey, Councillor Simic. Would anyone else like to speak to the substantive motion? Councillor Pearl.
Thanks so much. Yep, sorry, it's still off mute. To reiterate everything it said, it's a very difficult time at the moment with our budget settings, but effectively by voting down the previous amendment, we are blocking options now, which is the unfortunate thing, because the way this budget setting now sets council on is not really to consider some very key components of the budget, because it would be irresponsible to slow the budget process down if we didn't set out those options today. And that's disappointing, but that's the reality of the situation we're in. What is good, at least we have this debate now and tonight than we had it previously. And the officer's recommendation details some of the things that have been talked about behind the scenes. But I don't think it's also true to say when people say that we've talked about these things. they've been talked about as platitudes, but we really don't have the information in front of our community about how we go out and have a vibrant discussion about what rates are acceptable. And in my view, it would be absolutely unconscionable to increase rates in a year when so many people are losing their incomes. It's a tragedy. And particularly those hit the hardest, which is low and middle income earners, particularly middle income earners who who are getting squeezed hugely at the moment with large debt repayments, lack of income, and increasing costs coming through their family budgets. A lot of people reconcile that, say that rate increases aren't a small impact on family budgets, yet they then say over the long term it has a very detrimental effect. It does have a detrimental effect, rate increases over time. There's no doubt about that, but they reduce as time goes by. So a 2% increase this year that we might sacrifice equates to close to $30 million over the 10-year period. That's true, but you're also talking about a budget that's likely to increase over that time and consume about $3 billion in resources. So as time, in terms of income, so as time goes by, the longer it goes, that compounding effect everyone talks about gets less and less. So over the 10 years, it's 1% or less total impact over a 10-year budget, which I'm sure we can easily absorb. I'm going to vote against the motion here this evening. The reason I do it is it doesn't provide basic settings to what my principles are and the principles that most of my constituents in Port Melbourne, South Melbourne and St Kilda Road have been abundantly clear in the more than 400 emails they've written to me on this topic in the past 3 weeks. Those principles are that council should focus on the resources, on the areas of greatest community need at a time when they need it most, but those resources should be within our control and those services should be within our control. It's also unconscionable to increase rates in a year when so many people are losing incomes. And thirdly, that debt should never be used to fill a budget hole, as short-term solutions can become long-term nightmares. So we're going out with budget settings that I don't agree with, which is why I'm voting against it. That doesn't mean I won't be a proactive participant part of the budget, but I can't go out and support a budget that increases rates at a time where our community can least afford it. And I strongly encourage you out there to provide your councillors with a really clear indication of the priorities and principles that you value dearly, because one of the options that we tried to put on the table here this evening won't be fully consulted in. So it's up to you to get in the ear of your councillors and make sure your voice is heard. So on the basis of that this evening, I won't be supporting the officer's recommendation here this evening.
Thank you, Councillor Pearl. Councillor Copsey.
Thanks very much, Madam Mayor. So I think it's very important for those listening at home so that we don't have confusion. There is a separate process that's just commenced for consultation on the budget. Contrary to what's being, the story that's being told by some people tonight, those settings are here to be discussed with our community, and I'm very pleased actually. When a few weeks ago we were ready to go out to consultation just about with a draft budget that was set essentially on a pre-COVID-19 reality, which everybody has had to grapple with the huge changes that have occurred over the last couple of months. Fortunately, and I'm very relieved actually that the state government made provision that we could have a slightly extended time frame for consideration and engagement on the budget this year, because frankly the budget that we hoped to deliver is different than what budget we're going to be able to deliver in this environment. This document tonight is setting out some changes to the outlook and the parameters that we're going to be considering, and I'm really pleased to see that it's actually spurred what I hope is going to be a very engaged conversation from our community around what we do prioritise and what we do put our effort and expenditure into, and how we make sure that we deliver a council budget that delivers the best outcomes for our community overall. These are serious debates that councillors rehearse a fair bit throughout our briefings and so on, and they will continue to be prosecuted, I'm sure. What I really want to encourage tonight is, for those who are watching along, it's true that we really have to consider what's important to our community at the moment, and councillors are very keenly aware of that. And I think one thing that's really come through in consensus, as much as we have it amongst this councillor group, is that we do need to really carefully consider what's most important to our community and prioritise our spending in that regard, particularly given the environment that we're in now because of the financial constraints that everybody's feeling because of COVID-19. The impacts of COVID-19 haven't just been financial, though. We've seen huge impacts on people's well-being. We've seen huge changes to the way that people are working, terrible levels of job losses, and people are isolated and experiencing strains on their lives. In that context, I think how we deliver as a council comes into even sharper focus. What we're here as a group of councillors to do is to deliver positive outcomes for our community overall. Please engage with the documents that I hope will be endorsed tonight to go out for beginning that conversation. There are some items in the list of service reductions that are going out for preliminary consultation. There are some items in the list of capital project deferrals and so on that I really don't want to see occur. And I'm sure that there will be lots of people in the community who have varying views about this. It's most important that we hear from everybody as we head into this process, because this budget needs to deliver what you want to see from your council. And my primary consideration when we go into this exercise every year, and I thank the officers for the very comprehensive documents that they produce, not just around the budget, but the updates to the financial outlook. They're very informative, and I think that they give a good picture of the complexity of the decisions we have to make. Look, I've said this a couple of times recently. There's that old adage that how you spend your money is how you vote on what you want to see in the world. And essentially that's the process we have to go through each year with our budget as council. We can't make those decisions properly without having your input as community members. So, councillors, I think it's going to be a really difficult conversation. I also hope that as we go through this conversation, we'll think about the changes that we're experiencing that have come about suddenly as a result of COVID-19. But some of the things that we're doing now, maybe improvements on past. Certainly the future we're going into is not going to be the same as the one that we came out of. So I think that this has to be a budget that fits the times. And I also hope that we'll take the opportunity to consider the things that we might stop doing, that we might do differently, and the new things that we'll take up. That's definitely considered in the document before us tonight, is the significance of the changes that we're going through as a society and as a community. And I would really urge community members to participate to make sure that your priorities are reflected in the document that we ultimately adopt as a council, and that we keep working together to make sure that we have services that make living in this beautiful part of the world a fair and equitable experience for everybody.
Thank you, Councillor Copsey. Now, Councillor Bond, please. Want to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I won't be supporting this. As I said earlier, anyone, whether you're a council, whether you're a government, whether you're a business or an individual who's putting up their pricing, putting up their fees, or putting up their rates in this current environment is just completely tone deaf to the situation we currently find ourselves in. All across the states, we're seeing other councils listen to their communities. Tonight, for example, Ballarat voted not to put up their rates this financial year. So it is possible to do it. if we wanted to do that. Unfortunately, this council doesn't have the will to go down that path. That's rather unfortunate, but I certainly will not be ignoring my community. I'll be listening to them, and I will be not voting to not put up our rates at a time when our community is hurting. So I will not be supporting this particular motion here tonight.
Thank you, Councillor Bond. Councillor Baxter.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So I will be supporting this motion. I'm still somewhat stunned by just some of the lies and just utter
point of order,
political game playing that I've seen here.
Point of order, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Baxter. Please stop. There's been a point of order that's been called. Councillor Bond, under what section is the point of order being called?
It'd probably be under our code of conduct. That comment was completely disrespectful of the views and completely intolerant of the views of his fellow councillors. So I'm pretty sure under the code of conduct, we're obliged to respect the views of our fellow councillors, not to denigrate them the way Councillor Baxter just did by referring to comments by myself, or I presume also Councillor Earl, as lies. I'd ask you to direct Councillor Baxter to speak to the motion before us.
Thank you, Councillor Bond. That's enough. I'd just like to call on the CEO. I'm looking at the list of grounds, and that's not one of them. Councillor, Mr. Smith.
Through you, Madam Mayor. I don't believe Councillor Baxter finished his comment. I did hear him say some of the lies. I don't think it was directed at any particular person because he wasn't able to finish. I suspect you'd ask Councillor Baxter to just be mindful of his language and the requirements to respect other councillors. But clearly, in terms of them being able to make some assessment in terms of the meeting procedures, I don't think Councillor Baxter was able to actually finish what he was saying. So probably just a reminder, Councillor Baxter, to continue to be respectful.
Yes, thank you for that advice. I do think Councillor expressing a different opinion is not grounds for raising a point of order. But Councillor Baxter, please speak to the motion and perhaps not be as inflammatory. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I would say that being called tone deaf about 2 minutes ago, I didn't call out a point of order because I have normal thickness skin. I did say that there had been lies said that in this chamber. I didn't call anyone a liar. I didn't personally disrespect anybody, but falsehoods were put out about here, and I really want to make sure that people understand that we need to be looking in this 10-year financial outlook in our budget process. We need to be looking at all of the different options, and we will be. To say that we are not is incorrect. I acknowledge that there are 7 councillors who are highly dedicated to making sure that we get the best outcome from the community. They're not about playing political games. They're not here on orders from their masters. They are here to try and absolutely make sure that in a very, very difficult time that we make those difficult decisions on behalf of our community, that we make sure that we put that responsibility on us to do that, that we communicate with our community on this sort of thing. And I am looking forward to continuing to work with those councillors who are invested in this process and who want to actually see the best for their community instead of the best for themselves. And I look forward to completing that process with those councillors who wish to come to the table in that respect.
Thank you, Councillor Baxter. Would anyone else like to speak for or against this motion? Councillor Simic, yes, I think you can speak. I don't think you spoke earlier. I think you just seconded the motion.
Thank you.
I think you spoke, didn't you? Sorry.
Amendment.
He's already spoken, so he doesn't get a second opportunity.
He did speak, did he? Can I have some clarification on that, please? The governance,
He seconded the motion, so therefore he's had his opportunity to speak. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
He did second the motion. I don't think he spoke to it.
That's okay. Thank you, Mayor.
Madam Mayor, he had his opportunity to speak before Councillor Pearl moved his amendment. So, Councillor Simics.
Thank you, Councillor Bond. Thank you. I'm asking, but Councillor Simic, you're withdrawing your request to speak anyway. Okay, so we can deal with that. Thank you very much. Councillor Brand.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm just going to talk about what's in front of us at the moment. It is a bit of a blueprint of how we approach the budget I suppose in the perspective of a 10-year budget, and all of that entails, because this is really important when we set a budget, that it has the long-term future in mind, even though it is obviously responding to very, very particular short-term situations. And I just want to say, I think it sets a pretty good direction for us to take. All of this work, all of these sessions and reports and sub-budgets and public sessions and information sessions and what have you, are all heading towards a really, really important public consultation starting in mid-June, which I think will be one of the most important ones that we've ever had, because it's so spectacularly different and difficult. And I hope it'll be one of the most, or if not the most, participatory public consultation that we've ever done. And I'm really, I really hope that we can achieve that. And this is all just feeding into it and heading towards it. I think we've done quite a good job with it so far. I want to point, I suppose, for instance, to the attachment, which is the portfolio reductions attachment, that one-page list of budget cuts. This is stuff which I have to say is pretty alien to my sort of general sort of experience on council, to find a list of things that we've cut that adds up to $16 million. We haven't cut this yet. I'm sorry. I need to be clear. This is a proposal. This is a sort of a check, a look and feel. How might we go about it? It has been an incredible process of sitting down together, on the whole, very collaboratively. And, unlike some of the little bits going on tonight, we've actually, on the whole, done this really well together, I think. And we have gone through, this is just, maybe it's the easier part, the capital works, the portfolio reductions is maybe a little bit easier because it's not quite as as hard and human focused as the service cuts that we need to look at. But it is really difficult. And when you look at each of these items on it, it is real blood on the floor, and it is really difficult. And even though a lot of them, most people won't care too much about a lot of them, each one of these projects, each one of these cuts affects the community. It affects things that people really, really dearly want, and it affects people's jobs as well. It is a really serious and difficult and gruesome list, which I think we have handled quite well. We have debated each one of these points. We've looked at it from all angles. We've compromised. We've made allowances. We've brought things back in. We've reconsidered each one of these things to find something which is actually doable with the minimum amount of damage, either to council's capacities or to council's assets, or most importantly to its human capital and its human assets. And this is a list which I think is, it's a list I wish we didn't have and we didn't have to do, but it is actually, I think, a pretty well balanced and certainly well considered list as an interim list of how we might go about it, and it is out there for the public, for the community to look at and think about and contemplate. Tell us if we've got it drastically wrong, but you please remember that for every single one that you think is wrong, somebody else will think it's right and something else is wrong. It is a really difficult project to do, a difficult process to go through. Anyway, I'm really happy to be putting this out with these sort of interim proposals for debate, and I'm really looking forward to a big and long, strong public consultation, and when we come out with the draft budget itself, guided by what we're looking at tonight, then it'll be a really big thing for the community to get their heads around and to contribute and to help us set something which is fair and real and, you know, and deals with an emergency that we're all suffering from, some far worse than others. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brand. Would anyone else like to speak? I will briefly as well, and I don't want to repeat anything that's been said so well tonight. I think each and every one of you have very articulately conveyed their position, so that's very clear. But I did want to, in particular, call out the officers and the amount of work that has been done to get us to today. It's quite extraordinary. They have not only come up with a very detailed and well thought through document, but they've also found efficiency savings, and they've found those every single year, and things get tighter and tighter and tighter. We have had multiple briefings, as has been mentioned by numerous councillors tonight, and we've gone through everything with a fine-tooth comb, and it's not easy. You know, for me personally, for example, there's been some projects in there that I have been waiting to see come to fruition for 7 years, and unfortunately they're cut, and I was hoping to see them in the next few months go in, as an example. So it's pretty hard. They're things that the community in particular might have lobbied me on. They were election promises, but you know, they've either been deferred or going as part of the first level discussion with the community. So it is tough. This is a good start, and I am supportive of the portfolio changes, even though it's been very, very difficult. I also wanted to reiterate that we do want to have everyone possible come out from the community and contribute to this discussion. We are endorsing tonight some initial service reductions, which is really tough. For example, things like the pressure washing services. We're ceasing funding to start the discussions to cease funding with the Southport Community Legal Service. We're going to reduce the assist counter services, the time that's open at Port Melbourne and South Melbourne. That's going to affect the community, but it is some way that we're going to reduce the income, the money that's needed to support that, reducing the maintenance of Vic Road's assets. We're cutting Diversity Magazine basically and just going only to a digital platform. That will affect a lot of our residents. Many people in our community won't like reading diversity online. We'll be freezing our community grants and ceasing neighbourhood grants, and we're certainly reducing the number of memberships to external bodies. So these are all things that we're starting discussions on. This is before we get to the budget for next year. So this is for this year. So I'll be supporting this recommendation, and I urge all our councillors to do the same. It is a big step forward. And once again, just thank all the officers for their work. Councillor Copsey, you moved, but I think you didn't speak right at the very beginning. Do you need to speak again, or shall we just?
I think actually it was Councillor Crawford.
Oh, Councillor Crawford. Oh my. Councillor Crawford, would you like to close?
Look, I just want to say this is actually a document highlighting where we're at. That's what it is. We're being transparent with you about the difficult choices ahead. Please tune into the budget contribution, because as Councillor Copsey said, it's, you know, budget's a reflection of what matters to a community. So please show us what matters. And there are conversations to have, but already we have radically cut back on many things, and there are many more to come. So please come and join us on this journey of this discussion, and consider, what matters to you, where you'd like the money put, and what's the best possible way forward for our community via this budget.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Crawford. I'll now put the motion under division and we'll call each councillor to vote. Councillor Baxter?
For.
Councillor Bond?
Against.
Councillor Brand?
For.
Councillor Copsey?
For.
Councillor Crawford?
For.
Councillor Gross?
For.
Councillor Pearl?
Against.
Councillor Simic?
For.
Councillor Voss? For. That motion has been carried. Right, we're coming right to the end. Item 15 now is notices of motion, and councillors, we don't have any notices of motion tonight. Item 16 is the reports by councillor delegates. Councillors, any reports to give tonight? There are none. Item 18 is confidential matters, and we don't have any confidential items tonight. So there being no further business, I declare the meeting closed. Thank you.